We want. Okay. Jason is moving. All right. I'm going to call the meeting of the Board of Selectmen to order at 7:04 p.m. Our first item is the Pledge of Allegiance, and I would recognize Commissioner Kowalski to lead us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mike. Very well. So for anybody who may be watching online or in the room, this is going to be a pretty jammed meeting. Usually I make a pithy joke about how these will be short and sweet, and they never turn out to be the case. I'm not even going to pretend this time. We do have the Planning and Zoning Commission joining us. Gentlemen, thank you for being here in person. I think there's a couple of other members online, although I can't see at the moment. So we're going to talk about, later in the meeting, we're going to talk about two issues of timely importance affecting the town that are unrelated to each other. That's under new business B and C, which is a discussion of the recent marijuana legislation and policies and regulations moving forward for the town. And then we're going to talk also about solar developments and the town strategy going forward on that. It made sense to include both the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Board of Selectmen in that, because the Board of Selectmen is the policymaker and the Planning and Zoning Commission is the regulatory board. So it made sense to have that conversation so we can make sure we're rowing in the same direction. But before we do that, we have some other housekeeping things that we need to get to and a couple of other important issues that I know there's some interest online about. First and foremost, approval of the meeting minutes. Everybody's had a chance to review, I believe. Is there a motion?
I move to approve the Board of Selectmen regular meeting minutes from August 19th, 2021.
Motion's been made. Are there any corrections?
On page 5, we've been talking about the erase money. Discussion continued to clarify 33,600 reference crypto and his opening discussion 760 plus administrative cost brings it up to $1 million. The vote was 900,000. We already had $200,000 plus the administrative costs or staff time as was recorded on page 6. Those numbers don't match.
Well, the motion's correct to increase the amount.
The motion is correct. I agree with that.
You're saying that
the discussion continued with which clarified. It sounds like we're paying way too much money for administrative costs, and that's not true.
I took it from the table. From the video.
I did not go back and listen to the video because I just didn't think to do that.
I did because kind of you were over my head.
So initially,
initially Mr. Curtis mentioned the 733, and then it got increased, I believe, because
well, even that's not going to make the numbers for the motion come out. That could have been just discussion and it got changed.
Okay,
so let's move to strike from the asterisk to the end of the paragraph.
Yeah, just because it's going to be confusing.
Yep, and the rest of the content of the discussion would be consistent there. Page 5, Peg, third paragraph from the bottom, from the asterisk to the end of the paragraph. Any other?
That's all I have.
Anybody else? All in favor of the minutes as amended, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. I know that this whole packet was a weighty one, and I apologize, but tonight's it's gonna be too. Okay, next, public participation. There are members online and there are members here in person. I'm first going to ask if there is anybody in person who would like to address the board on any topic. Are there any members of the public who would like to address the board? Is there anybody online who would like to address the Board of Selectmen? Please unmute yourself, turn on your camera, and identify yourself by name and address. Seeing none, there will be another opportunity later on. Before we go further, I do have a need for an added agenda item. I'd like to add under new business under 9I, discussion of energy procurements. That's why Mr. Norton is with us tonight. And also to let him know that we will do his best not to make him be 9I. Can I have a motion to add agenda item 9I, a discussion of energy procurement? So moved. Is there a second? Second. Made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
I'll get you in as soon as I possibly can. Okay. We have a couple of communication items, invitations both. There's going to be a dedication for the Anthony D. Mastrantonio Fire Station on September 18th from 2 to 4 p.m. Earlier that same day, the Board of Selectmen has been invited to participate in the Four Town Fair's annual parade. We are the host community this year. Anybody know if they will or will not be participating in that? Will.
Well,
No, I have a previous weekend, but I can cancel it and come. My only concern is if the weather is hot, I will not be able to make that walk. Yeah. But if it's cool, then I can make that walk. So
why don't I let them know that the board will be represented, and if you can make it, you can make it. If not, then that's certainly understood. Okay. Hey, Joe, do you have any idea where the Board of Selectmen banner is? You do?
I'm sure it should be up to the
Oh, great.
top of the shelf.
And we're gonna steal that for the parade.
I believe the spelling on it's wrong. I think it's.
It does. It does.
When are you doing this?
September 18th.
We could probably get you another one if you want.
Okay.
Okay. I'm good.
It's got a typo on the banner
I
representing.
think it says man instead of
It
men or
does.
something.
I remember seeing
Yes.
that when it was marched with.
Okay.
yes,
Yes, please.
I'll send myself a reminder.
Thank you. Next up is 7C, numbers 1 and 2. We have appointments to make to the Capital Improvement Planning Committee. I want to thank Pete Larice, who stepped forward and offered his assistance, as well as David Swain. This will give the board enough people to actually conduct their business, which is timely because their busy season is the month of September. Could I have a motion to appoint Pete Larice and David Swain for terms on the Capital Improvement Planning Committee ending July 31st, 2022?
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Made and seconded. Any discussion? Thank you again. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So carried. Next, Mr. Kribda, where are we with the American Rescue Plan Act and our erase grants?
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I'll try to be brief on what is a sometimes dense subject. We ended up with 114 applications considered. One did not qualify because of residency. 113 were evaluated. Of those, 104 are completed. That leaves 9 outstanding. One applicant is not likely to answer my inquiries, and I'm going to ask at the end of your deliberations that you consider putting a deadline so that we can end the discussion at a certain point with folks that are somewhat recalcitrant. So of the 8 remaining, 2 are in process. And by that I mean there's literally numbers coming to me from accountants and things of that nature, and we're engaged. And I expect that to be done very quickly. The last 6 require more clarification about, well, there's a host of issues involved, but more clarification. So that's a 92% completion rate. And that represents an outlay to the community of $989,700. There's an additional issue that I would like to bring forward, and that's 4 applications came in after our deadline. 1 application came in at 4:39 p.m. on 8/9, and the board has previously decided to allow that. And that is reflected in these numbers that I just gave you. 1 came in at 5:13 p.m. on the 9th. 1 came in at 10:19 p.m. on the 9th. And 1 came in at 11:18 a.m. on the 30th. There has also been several other inquiries as to whether or not this would be opened or opportunities for even additional folks to apply. So that's where we are right now. I expect to be able to clear up these in very short order. Some decisions are decisions that have to be made by the town. So I'd be glad to take any questions. And in fact, I'm happy to take any questions anytime, not just tonight. So
let's start with the tardy applications. So we have a couple of options there. We can either opt to accept nothing after the deadline, opt to accept those the same day, opt to accept those that we have received, but that's it. Although in that case, we've already turned away other people who have sought to apply. So we do need a determination as to how you want to handle that. So what do you guys think in terms of late submissions?
How did we word and I should have looked at it before the meeting, but the wordage was that the deadline was August 9th. Did we say specifically 4 o'clock?
I thought it was 4.
Close of business on that day, I believe.
Yeah, which is 4:30.
Which is 4:30, okay.
And it's spelled out at 4:30 in the application and the criteria.
And we set the precedent by allowing the one that was 8 minutes late.
Well, that
Accepted on the 9th. How many of those applications came in the evening of the 9th?
3.
The one that you previously allowed to be considered,
Yeah.
and then 2 others.
And then how many after that?
1.
that we've actually received. And we've had others that we've turned away saying the application's over.
I personally am okay with accepting ones that came in on that day, because maybe they had some computer issues or something, and it shows in good faith that they were trying to submit it in a timely manner.
They had a month.
I know.
Computer issues at
Well,
4:30.
Some people wait till the last minute, I don't know.
I mean, I left here the night that we left here that was going to be it. It was that one that was late with 8 minutes. Okay. Everybody's watch is off a little bit. I don't think we should accept any more applications after that, but that's just me.
Guys,
I'm okay with day of. Return that to.
okay, then that's what we'll do. We should codify that though. So we should have a motion to accept applications that were received on August 9th.
The last application, when was that received on?
10/19. Oh, the last application, August 30th.
Oh, okay. But that's far enough away where I don't.
Okay, so can I have a motion to accept all applications received by 11:59 p.m. on August 9th?
Move we accept all applications received on August 9th by 11:59 PM.
Second,
Discussion?
we have enough money to cover it.
Yeah,
Reallocate.
we're very fine. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion is 3-1, 3 in favor, 1 opposed. The other thing that Marie was opposed. The other question that we need, because there is that, there are outstanding pieces of information that we've requested. We need to wrap this up. So when is the end of it? George's recommendation to me had been, because the next time the board meets is September 16th, that he needs to have all of the information by September 13th so that he can do a write-up and a review. That to me sounds like a reasonable amount of time considering the outreach that he's done. Does anybody think that's an inappropriate deadline or?
I think that's more than generous.
Okay, so George, that's what we'll use, and that means that by the 16th, we should be able to wrap this up in terms of the awards, and then there's still going to be the final termination report.
Correct.
See, so these. Question?
Yeah, that's what we're moving on to now.
Oh, okay. I'll wait then till you move on to that. These-
Well, now we're, so, okay. So you guys have a list of the applicants, their requested amount and their recommended amount. There are 6 columns. The first column is the applicant name. Second column is the amount requested. The third column is the amount recommended by Mr. Kribda. The fourth column is entirely blank, and that's the one that's amount approved by the Board of Selectmen. Then there's a column that says confirmed by the assessor, yes or no. And the last column is Assessor Notes. So what we were doing, there were some questions about the validity of business addresses or business addresses being listed in the town. And so I asked Helen to go through and confirm that they either were listed as a business in the community or they were exempted for some tax purpose. And she came back with a list with some notes on them. The other thing that she pointed out is that her list was not as complete in some cases as the Concord program through the Secretary of State's office. So an unanticipated consequence of this project is we have actually added businesses to the grant list for a personal property. So Helen and Patty will have something to do when it comes tax time again. So we picked up, I think, eight new businesses that weren't previously known to be in the town of East Windsor from our records, but actually were on record with the Secretary of State.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay. So you've done your homework.
Yes, I have.
So there are, I think, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 that are listed as needing additional review. The amount recommended for those are blank. There's in those cases, there's additional information that's needed, or there's follow-up that still needs to be done, or there's something. So I would ask that the board move to postpone a decision on those applicants that are labeled in blue until September 16th, so that George has an opportunity to complete the solicitation of outstanding information.
You don't mind? I did some research because I want to make sure what I do, I'm going to make my votes accurate and that it meets the criteria for which we set forth. And over and above what's highlighted here, I have 2 companies that I would like further research on. One of them being River Valley Group Works, LLC. The individual that filled out the paperwork lives on Depot Street, but I'm not sure, based upon what I read in the summation, where the fields are. So I would like to know if that's impacting fields in East Windsor, if that's impacting outside of the town, because the criteria that we put forth, it was to take care of businesses within East Windsor, not business is owned by somebody in East Windsor. And I'm not even sure if the person owns the business or if they're just doing the application for somebody. And the fact that they just signed up with the Secretary of State on January 8, 2021. That's relatively new. So I just like to make sure that when we do it, that it's accurate. So I would like you to do a little bit more research on that one, if you don't mind, for me.
So noted. What's the other one?
And the other one would be Hartford Toner and Cartridge.
Give me that name again. I don't have it.
Hartford Toner and Cartridge Inc.
I don't have a copy of that list, right?
I'm going to give you one afterwards. I
And I
a
have
different
no,
list that
I
has
have
some
no
proprietary information.
issue with the narratives that were given. But I have an issue with what might be approved tonight as far as documentation in a form of a, I'll use the word contract for lack of a better word, contract and agreement. So I'd just like to have a little bit of research done on that one also.
If I may, so you'd like me to determine whether the fields that are growing the product are in East Windsor for the first one, which is River Valley Grow Works, and what exactly would you like me to determine about Hartford Toner and Cartridge?
My concern is not with the application that was submitted, because I
Right.
believe they took a loss. I don't have an issue with that.
Mhm.
My issue becomes with what we received this evening to review as far as the grant agreement. I would hate to put money out there in somebody's hands only for them to get this if it's approved
Certainly.
and have to take it back. I think that's just not what I feel comfortable doing.
Okay.
So
I'd
we
rather
could,
check it first to make sure, or change the language in there if need be. But because we haven't got to that yet, I would like you to hold this off until the end.
Okay.
so maybe what we can do is we can share the contract language once it's approved with the applicant and have them confirm that they can sign it without being in breach.
That's fine, Jim.
Okay.
Are there other award recommendations of concern?
I just want to say I have a better understanding of what this poor man has put himself through. With us. Kudos to you, because I didn't do nearly as much work as you did, and I was totally exhausted after I got done. Just because nothing matches. You think you got a name right of a company, but they're under a sub company with the state, so you have to cross-reference that. So it was a learning experience, which was good. And then you got two companies that have similar names. So when you have to go back and find out that the different addresses, so kudos to you. Great job.
Well, thank you very much. I very much appreciate that. I did a lot of follow-up in phone calls and in emails, and the stories that poured out from people amazed me at the resiliency, how they changed their business models, how they quickly figured out how they could survive if they changed their layout or did things differently. It showed a lot of ingenuity, a lot of fortitude. It showed to me that your small business community is strong and community minded. They've done, almost everyone had a story about how they helped someone else. So I'm proud to have been part of the project, and I thank the board for the opportunity.
It was really an eye opener for me. I mean, I know a lot of these businesses, but a lot of them I never even heard of. It was interesting to get a little synopsis of what they're doing, what they're providing.
I also want to say that this is a brief snapshot. I didn't sit there writing and writing and writing because I was trying to be efficient for the board and for the money. And at the same time, once I had someone hit their magic number of 10,000, I didn't list ad nauseum other things. So it's only a partial view of what's really out there, but it satisfies in my mind the requirements of the federal government for the money being distributed. And anyone who ever doubts it, I would just ask you to have them read the final rule and get a true picture of what the damage was to our country and how this is a response to try to get people back up on their feet.
Any other questions or comments on the recommendations from Mr. Krivda?
I
Sarah?
would just like to thank Mr. Krivda also for his hard work and follow up with everybody. I can totally see all the amount of hours and work you put into this, and just reading all the documents that you gave us, it was really amazing to see how much of a loss a lot of these families and businesses took. So I'm hoping that by doing this, we can offer some relief, and I know we won't give back a lot of their total loss, but it's a good start to getting them back on their feet.
So we have the list that was provided to you folks. In blue, or based on this conversation, there are a number that we need to hold additionally, and I have two more that should have been in blue that were not, which is Tile Concepts and Tile Concepts Plus.
Those two are in my 6 that require more clarification.
Okay. All right.
Concept plus?
Yep, those are ones he's still chasing down. All right. So,
Perhaps it would be helpful to me to name the ones that are outstanding.
yeah.
So the one that's not likely to answer any inquiries is KTI. The two that are in process are the Historical Society and Roberto's Real American Tavern. The 6 that require Roberto's. The 6 that require more clarification are Balch, Feral Cats of East Windsor, Boyer Properties,
Number 15 on the list.
Feral Cats,
Feral cats, just a minute, because that jumped out at me, but they also go under another name. Hang on. I'll get it for you.
It's not the name, it's their issue.
Okay, I'll talk to you afterwards. I'll send you a message. They have a different name in here.
Jenny's Maid Service, Tile Concepts, and Tile Concepts Plus. So again, the last 6 were Balch, Boyer Properties, Jenny's Maid Service, Tile Concepts, and Tile Concepts Plus. And the 2 that we're actually talking to each other right now and getting numbers back and forth are the Historical Society and Roberto's. So maybe that brings more clarification to what's being pulled. So in addition to those 6 that require more clarification, now I understand you're also adding River Valley Grow Works and Hartford Toner and Cartridge. So that would bring 8 that would require more clarification. And I'm only repeating that to make sure that I understand exactly what I think you folks are understanding.
So I think then it's 10. Hold on. I think we can accept Mr. Krivda's recommended amounts as presented, except for number 53, Hartford Toner and Cartridge. Number 90, River Valley Grow Works. That's it. I think we can accept the recommendations except for those 2 that were flagged. The others didn't have a recommendation, so there's nothing to accept.
1, 2, 3.
Actually, the Feral Cats does have a recommendation.
That was pulled for another matter. That's his summary report. There was additional review that was done on a number of them that raised other issues that still need to be clarified. So it was recommended but pulled.
So you're going to pull Feral Cats, 41. Pull in review.
Mm-hmm.
1, 2, 3, That brings you up to 11 that you're working on. Just want to make sure
Yes,
that I got.
That's what I would have now too, yeah.
So I'd entertain a motion to accept Mr. Crypto's recommendations with the exception of number 53 and number 90.
I'll move to accept Mr. Kribda's recommendations with the exceptions of number 53 and number 90.
Second.
Made and seconded. Any discussion?
I have a question for clarification. Are we going to go back over the other 9 before he to approve
Yeah.
those other 9?
He'll do some additional legwork in the next 2 weeks, and we'll come back to those on the 16th.
Okay, so we're not approving those that are.
No, we're done with this list after this vote for this evening. There's 2 other matters we need to talk about on this topic.
And there will be 11 left for me
Yep.
to try to resolve.
Yep.
Any further comments or discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. George, you really did do yeoman's work.
Well, thank you. Do you need me to be part of the other discussion?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Don't go anywhere, but.
Don't go anywhere?
So we've just approved like 102 of these. The next step now is we need to notify them and they need to sign a W-9 and a contract with the town before we can release the funding to them. So we have 2 things for your review. I tried to get these to you guys as quickly as I could, but things were coming in until late in the day, so they kept coming out late in the day. The first one we'll start with is this one, the 1-pager, which is a draft award letter. It'll be personalized to each applicant, including the name of the name of the business and the amount that's approved for them. I'm also going to strike the last sentence from, or I'm going to edit the last sentence in the first paragraph because we don't have that number yet. Other than the last sentence in the first paragraph, does anybody have any changes or corrections to this?
So you're just gonna make that you've been approved.
Yeah, something to that effect, yeah.
I don't mean to be difficult, but we haven't approved the 2 documents, or not approved the 2 documents that we.
Oh, there's another typo there
that
too.
was in here.
That should be pulled. Yeah, we're going to approve the documents tonight, though. I mean, they're going to need a contract.
Okay.
You know, they.
Yeah.
I'll make a motion that we authorize the sending of the COVID grant agreement award letter
Second.
with the edits that Jason has suggested for this last sentence of the first paragraph.
Yeah, it's got there's a bullet. That should be a bullet in there. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, now a contract. George and I tried to make this as simple and user-friendly as we could. And then I sent it off to Josh and he sent me back something that was torturous. And we met in the middle. So the contract draft is before you. Are there, I know you guys got this afternoon, so I do apologize for that. But are there any questions or comments that you have or suggested changes that I can run back to him on this?
I do have a question.
Okay.
On 1G, where did we come up with the 7 year?
I asked that question. He told me that was federal law,
Okay.
tax law. I hadn't heard of that, but I specifically asked that because in one of the previous versions of this, each business was required to also use GAAP accounting. And I was like, dude, you know, come on.
Okay.
So I asked about the 7 year thing, and that was the answer that he gave me was tax law.
Okay.
I should have highlighted this, but because it was late when I saw it, I didn't, so, I don't want to, we've got a busy schedule, I don't want to waste a lot of time, but, there's a provision in here that says that the business has to be in, active status for a year after the grant money. I'm not sure that was the intent of helping the businesses. We're helping the businesses for their losses, and hope that it will get them through. But with the insertion of COVID strains, and if they should have to close up again, even with the $10,000 max, if somebody gets, it may not be able to be sustainable for another year. So I don't agree with that, but that's just me.
I had flagged that same thing in an earlier draft, and that was supposed to come out. So if it's still in there,
It's in here somewhere. I apologize, but I
got it. It's
fast.
We're talking about 1C.
Yep.
Let's see.
First page.
Yep.
I
That would be
have
it.
an issue with that too.
Yeah, I did as well. That was supposed to come out, but didn't. I'm not sure why it didn't.
So we got it here on 1E, that grantor, the employees and officials, we can review at any time, anyone that receives the grant.
Mhm.
Do we have in-house staff that's able to do that? Is that going to require us to go and hire somebody or to continue?
No, we wouldn't hire somebody to do that. That's catch-all language to allow us to do that if we so
If we so
chose.
chose, okay. So if that's being removed from here, no wonder if the individual should, and that's this is the problem that I have with that one that I asked you to review. There's another business in that establishment now that leads me to believe that Hartford Toner is no longer in business. But they did have a loss. There's a paragraph in here that stood out when I was reading it that would affect that individual because the grant money is supposed to be used towards the business and there is no business now.
The grant money is supposed to be used for the intended purpose that was included in the submission of the grants.
Right.
So if they're in the circumstance where somebody had applied on August 9th and was out of business by now,
Yeah.
As I understand the interim final rule, the criteria that we were looking to satisfy was that to relieve an economic loss. There wasn't a lot of direction in terms of future use of the funding. But Josh also opted to include that. We had a conversation about that as well.
Okay. So that's all I had on the document. The rest, when I cruised through it, taking the boilerplate or.
Yeah. Severability clause and
Yeah.
no assignments and all that. Gentlemen?
Section 1C, I'm good with it. I just wanted to get clarification on 4.
Sure.
Grantee is not, in order to induce the grantor to make the grant, the grantee.
Yeah, you're right.
Let's do potatoes.
Yep, I totally agree.
Pardon me?
Because I have it.
Grantee is not in default of or not in compliance with any town of easements or obligations, including but not limited to land use and zoning regulation, and not in litigation with town. We did talk about tax liability. Does that get caught up in that?
No,
Okay.
I had that conversation specific to, we opted to waive that. He thought it was still in there. I said, no, we absolutely affirmed that we were not going after that.
Okay.
I would entertain a motion to accept the erase coverage grant agreement. With the exception of 1C, which will be removed.
Second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So just to give you guys a sense of the timeline, and for anybody who's paying attention online of the timeline, I expect that award letters will go out to recipients not later than Wednesday, hopefully Tuesday, but with the holiday, I'm not going to commit to anything. So expect that these things will start hitting mailboxes by the end of the week next week. We will need the I-9 and the W-9 and the contract returned. And then within 5 days, the town will cut a check out of the American Rescue Plan funds. Anything else?
The W-9 is going to require that they get taxed.
Yes.
They'll have that option for that, for a tax option on that. I guess I didn't give that any thought.
We have to send the W-9. They're contractors in the town. No, I-9 is an immigration document.
It says I-9 in the contract.
Right, it says I found it in the I-9.
In the contract?
In their letter.
The completed I-9 form.
Thank you.
You gonna fix that?
Yep. Yeah, it's an immigration thing. Okay. If there's nothing else on this, Patty, how are you tonight? Would you like to come up, or are you going to go to the podium? Or? So Patty has an update for us on how our tax collection season went. And it's really all good news.
Hopefully, yeah. So we conducted a tax sale on August 17th. We had several properties up, but before we had our tax sale, they all paid up except for one, which is basically what we want to see. The one property that was left was a mobile home. And I'm quite fortunate that I have a good relationship with the mobile homeowners, that they kind of take over those for me. So unfortunately, the mobile homeowner was not present, but I was able to give him a call, and he took care of that mobile home for us. And so all of them were taken care of for that. So we did pretty good. During COVID, I think it was a pretty good sale. I was happy with it. Adam was. So the day before, the two big heavy hitters came in. I was like, oh, this could be a good sale, but nope. So the money came in. That was the bottom line. So we got $200,000 from the sale and collected $4,700 for the WPCA. So that was that. I think Jason had put in your packet the July collections.
Yeah,
but
I just handed out the August one.
You guys did the August ones? Okay, so right now the town is at just over 56% collection, and the warehouse point is at 95%, and Broadbrook is at 97%. I'm actually pleased with those collection rates, considering we're 2 months into collection. That's I haven't done any extra type of collection. I haven't, I sent out delinquent notices. That's pretty much it. We haven't done a tax sale. I haven't threatened them with liens or collection agencies or anything. So that's pretty good. I do have to put a plug in for Heidi. She's worked her tail off during July to get all the mail processed so that I could concentrate on this new fire district and all these new reports that I had to do. So I give her kudos for that, so that I could concentrate on this. So, yeah, that's it.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions or comments on the information that Patty's presented? I agree, the collection rates are great for where we are right now. But and I look into that in terms of the 5-year or the 3-year trends that you provided.
Right, you see the 3-year review that.
So last year was a lower year at this point in time for collections, but we're way up over last year and on par or exceeding the year prior. So that says to me that we're going in the right direction.
Right.
Any other questions or comments for Patty? Oh, okay.
Nice job.
Thank you. And anytime you have a question, I'm available. You can call, email me, and I'll gladly answer any questions you have, okay? Thank
Thanks
you.
for hanging around. I appreciate it.
No problem. Have a good night.
Okay. So let's do, if I could have a motion to go on to 9I, that way we'll get Len out of here and then we'll turn on to the heavy topics of our agenda. Hey, Len.
Make a motion to take item 9I out of order.
Is there a second?
Second.
Made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Norton, you're up.
Oh, I oppose.
You know, problem.
He might have been up 10 minutes earlier than me, but
I was up 4 minutes earlier than you. It didn't take me long. Good evening. I don't know if you all know, but we have a power purchase agreement with CCM for our electrical power. It was a 5-year contract and it is going to expire at the end of this year, December 31st. So we need to do something for our energy. So we have kicked around a lot of different options actually. And at this time, we've just kind of decided to go back with CCM, see what they could do for us. And go from there. It has changed. It's now Titan Energy. When we first got involved with it, it was, it's Titan Energy. And they changed the consultant that they work with too. But so we had a Zoom meeting or conference call this past week, and I have the paperwork here. I have all the forms. Basically, we have to give them a capacity tag value release form so they can, get into our electric bills. We have public utility control, customer historical usage information. So we have to give them. We have to give them the latest month of every one of our electric bills that we have an account on. And we're doing this with the Board of Ed again, by the way, too. I should mention that. And Patrick, Joe had a conversation with Patrick and he was like good with that because, we're really doing everything. We have access to their bills as well as ours.
The important thing about including the BOE is that their usage gives us buying leverage.
Yes, we'll get a better deal. And that's why the previous to 5 years ago, they were not on the agreement we were with. And when we did it 5 years ago, actually Andy at CCM and the short sleeves, which were the consultant, suggested that we encourage the Board of Ed to get on, and they did, and we got a better rate. So we have forms that have to go in. I'm basically the contact person, but Jason had to sign the program that we're going to join the program. And eventually Jason and the superintendent, you get like 4 hours to sign this deal when it comes in, because that's how quickly the rates change.
And that's why this is coming before this board tonight, is because I need pre-authorization to sign that whenever that 4-hour window comes up.
It's quick, and we have to, the deal doesn't last forever. Now, the market is not great currently as far as going out to do this. So their thought is, and they're the experts really. So their thought is that we get all our information together, we get our agreement in, we get all our paperwork in, we get them all the bills, and they're going to put it out on the market. So the good thing is we do have until the end of December. So when they put it out on the market, if it comes back and them as experts decide we can do better than this, they're going to put it out again. And they'll put it out 3 times if they have to until we get the best deal. Now, I also asked about, so would this be another 5-year deal? And they're not even sure if it would be a 5-year. At first they started talking about, the length of the contract and your buying power and what have you. But it's so volatile, like right now, we may not be, 5 years may not be what we're looking at. We may be looking at 3. They're thinking a 3 to 5 year deal. And they'll work it the best they can to get us the best deal for that 3 to 5 year period. So that's where we are. We're in the process. My administrative assistant is putting together the all the electric bills. And as soon as she does, we're going to scan them. I'm going to scan these.
It's all done, it's ready to go. We're just waiting on you. It's all done.
Oh, she
Ready
did
to
it?
go, yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, so we're ready to go. It'll happen tomorrow or Monday. And I asked about natural gas as well, but they said that the agreements out there with because it's a whole energy thing, but the market for natural gas, they're going to look into it, but they don't think that they're going to get a better deal than the utility company at this point. The rates are pretty decent, they said. So that's where we are, and I guess I'm here because, as Jason said, me being the contact, they're probably going to email it to me, the offer. I'm going to email it to him or hand deliver it to him, and then we have to get it to Patrick because they both have to sign it within that 4-hour period.
So Len and I are not leaving town until this is over.
So yeah, we'll be here.
And they'll determine 3 years versus 5 years.
Yes, they're going to get us the best buying power they can for whatever the. 5 years ago, the best deal, we got a much better rate by going out to 5 years. It was a much better time to get into this and everything. And they believe that, you know, this issue isn't going to last either. They're hoping that, you know, towards the end of this calendar year, the prices are going to level out. Things are going to kind of get a little back to normal. It won't be as good as we did 5 years ago, but they're looking like beyond like whatever this 3-year period, whatever it might be, that they think things are going to level down a little better even. And that may be why they decide to recommend the 3 versus the 5, but these guys do this every day. So they're going to, I mean.
Are they looking at solar too as an option after the 3 years?
No. Well, they're not looking at it. They're looking strictly at electric company power, electric power. They did ask us what our plans were for solar because that does affect the people that are going to give us proposals. We said, you know, currently we've kicked around the idea of solar, whether or not we're going to put it on buildings or not, but at this point, there's nothing that's going to happen within a 1 or 2 year period. And they said, well, that's fine. But just, you know, we're just not going to put it together that quickly. So, but it would affect how different companies would approach an agreement with us. So that's where we are. We'll get the stuff back to them, and then they're going to put it out there and see who comes back with what.
Any questions or comments for Len? So first of all, thank you for doing the legwork on that. That is something that as you know, and Joe knows, is a very high priority on my to-do list. But you know, it makes sense for us to go with what's in front of us, given the timeline we have left on the contract, and do some planning for the next contract. And that I think is it's better than hurrying up into something that isn't ready yet. And that, you know, I would have liked to have been further along, but honestly, that was me that didn't get to push that as much as I would have wanted. But I do need an authorization to sign the contract. So it's through Titan Energy.
Well, it should be. That's who we're dealing with. But Titan Energy, I believe, is like the short sleeves were. So it might be with a different company. I would just get authorization to sign the energy purchase agreement through the CCM program or something. Because you never know who
I think that's sufficient. Can I have a motion to approve that or authorize that?
I'll move to appoint the selectmen in good faith to sign an agreement with CCM for a new electrical contract.
No, it's not CCM, it's whoever they.
It's just a power purchase agreement.
Right.
Because we don't know who it's with.
So if you don't mind, just amend your motion to say, to allow the first selectman to sign into the agreement put forth by Len Norton in regards to the energy procurement project or any future permitting process.
Got that thing. Friendly amendment is accepted. Any other discussion? Is there a second? I don't have a second yet.
Oh, second.
Made by Charlie, seconded by Marie. Now any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Now let's return to the regular call of the agenda. Thank you very much. Len.
Thank you for squeezing me in.
Len and Joe both have been up since 2:40
Sorry,
in the morning because of the rains last night. So I'm sure he's ready to go to bed.
They get ready to have a bourbon, not go to bed, but they both start with B.
Okay, next up, we're going to go on to 9B, which is a discussion of marijuana developments to include the Planning and Zoning Commission. So I have, well, last week, Joe, Ruth and I made a visit to a company that wanted to talk about the opportunity of expansion for marijuana cultivation and sales into the state of Connecticut. There was the law that was passed in the springtime allows for each individual municipality to put in place a moratorium of sorts for different periods of time or to establish regulations for sales. And I know the Planning and Zoning Commission has had an initial conversation about this. We have not, as a body, the Board of Selectmen have not had that conversation. So I asked that the Planning and Zoning Commission forego making any determinations on that until we were able to do that visit and actually have a basis of knowledge from where we were coming from, but also to have that conversation collectively. So that's what our purpose is here this evening. So I'd like to start by asking Ruth to do a little bit of an overview on the law. And Mike D'Amato is with us as well. If there's anything he wants to add at any point during this conversation, I'd invite that. And then after Ruth gives her overview, we'll turn it over to the gentleman that we met with last week, and then we'll have the dialogue between our two boards. That's kind of how I see this conversation going. So Ruth, the floor is yours.
So I have some information to share. It's kind of from my perspective. The act itself, an act concerning responsible and equitable regulation for adult use of cannabis, it's very broad. So it covers possession and use, cannabis establishments, social equity, because the whole business aspect of cultivation and sales generates revenue for the state and for the local government. And so there's dollars being put towards impacted communities and business opportunities for distressed areas. There's a lot of consumer protection through licensing and other regulatory controls. They're covering security and quality and proper labeling. It's 300 pages of 9 licenses will be issued by the Department of Consumer Protection. And those go from retailers to cultivators and non-farm cultivators, product manufacturing, food and beverage, deliverers, transporter. So there's a number of different licenses happening. I know one of the issues is how do you manage the land use aspect? And there are kind of controls or governors on, on these facilities, and it's done through a density cap. There's a density cap in place until 2024 that there can be 1 licensed micro cultivator. That's a cultivation facility that has 2,000 to 10,000 square feet of grow space, and 1 retailer for the purchases of consumers per 25,000. So that's 1 of each for each concern. And there's another control where the state, in order to receive your license to operate, you must have in your licensing package the planning and zoning approval, either through a special use permit or some other affirmative decision included in your application to the state. And also the law requires that the town not approve more locations than allowed. And that's their kind of checks and balance to make sure that we're not approving 5, but we can only have 1. So, and that's temporary until 2024, and they'll revisit that. So there's the issue at hand of coming up with zoning regulations for how we would treat these types of facilities. And cannabis retailers could be regulated very similarly to the selling of alcohol in liquor stores, right? Where you cite them, hours of operation, that type of thing. And there are specific details spelled out as far as restricted from being sited near schools or hospitals, veteran homes, churches, convents, and the like. To restrict signage and hours of operation. One of the other things I'd like to know, since we're a right to farm town, is cultivation is not considered farming. It's actually excluded from the definition of farming. However, typically they're indoor operations. What we saw was both indoor and outdoor. And that could be limited to an industrial or commercial zone use. So the act says that unless it's otherwise provided for in your regulations or an ordinance, a cannabis establishment shall be zoned for as if it were any other similar use. I guess that would be how we would kind of, if we don't put the regs in place, then we'd have to say retail cannabis. What's the similar use? Is it retail? Is it retail liquor store? You know, like how would we go about doing that? So there are 2 kind of options for the town. Really, is you prohibit the use townwide, right? And forego some of the benefits of 3% sales tax revenue coming to the town. Or you come up with your regulations to put the controls in place that you want. I guess I'd say that there are specific purposes for the revenue that comes into the town, kind of from the social services, mental health, addiction services, youth services. There's some streetscape improvement kind of thing in there for what you could do with money taken from the sales tax. On the state level, they have an excise tax, which is based on the percentage of THC in the products being sold. And that one eventually makes its way to be predominantly for social equity innovation fund. So we really want to be able to be good advisors to the town, and that's why we've been out touring and trying to put into context what it is we're going to have to manage and understand it better. And that brings us to where we are tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mike, is there anything you want to add at this point?
Sorry. No, I think Ruth covered it. The commission did discuss a moratorium, but we have had some questions from different folks about what the status of that is. And so at this point, they haven't taken any action. We haven't scheduled any hearings. So there has been no real discussion other than to vote to send that to CROG, because we have to give them 35-day heads up. So that's where things have been left with the commission.
Can I just add a little detail to that? Because the moratorium that he's talking about is allowing for time to develop detailed regulations. It's not a moratorium that says not allowed.
And what types of things are we, what types of things would be addressed in regulations? I know you just talked about this, but I want to be very clear. What is it that we're looking to regulate?
I've seen two different ways of connecting the ordinance or through planning and zoning. So I've seen what we'd be looking to regulate is where, right? Where you could locate retail.
In terms of zone or in relation to
zoning,
other types
in
of,
relation to other uses. For say receptors, sensitive receptors, as the environmentalist would say to you. Right? So anything that you might consider to be at risk. Going through the special use permit would follow guidelines and the regulations, you know, in keeping with the neighborhood, not, you know, devaluing or so. It would really be going for where in town and how.
and what have you or Mike had a chance to think about what types of zones or what locations would be the most beneficial if this were to come to the community?
I think initial discussions at planning and zoning, we talked about cultivation in commercial and manufacturing zones that came up. And we talked about the cannabis retailers could be dealt similarly to alcohol sales.
And generally speaking, where are the manufacturing zones in town?
So that would be down like in the Thompson, Berry, down in that section.
So the next part of our discussion, unless anybody has any present questions for Mike or for Ruth, the next part of our discussion, I want to introduce Rick Olstein. Rick was our host last week, and I'm going to ask him to introduce his team. I asked Rick to put together a presentation to speak generally about what their experience was doing business in the state of Massachusetts as Massachusetts was onboarding this program. What, from his perspective, municipalities had to deal with, what the regulatory parameters were in the state, what the quality control parameters are for his business, things like that. So Rick, I'm going to turn it over to you and you can introduce your team and then, you know, we'll ask questions as we go along.
Sure, thank you. And we certainly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you guys this evening. Just for a little bit of context, we own some land in town on Newbury Road that we'd be interested in pursuing this use for somewhere in the future. And we think it's a excellent spot for primarily cultivation, but we would be interested in a number of different cannabis-related uses. And I'm also a owner of a cannabis company in Massachusetts. It's a vertically integrated company, which means that we really handle all aspects of the business from cultivation to manufacturing to retail. With me here this evening is Charlie Rice, who's our Chief Executive Officer, Anthony Brock, who's our Chief Operating Officer, and Ron McCord, who is our Director of Security. And I did not prepare a presentation. I guess I was a little bit more under the impression that this was sort of more of a Q&A. So, we're all here and available to share our experience, answer any questions that you have, but I don't really have a specific presentation to go through right now.
That's fine. I think a Q&A is probably just as impactful. So tell us a little bit about what your experience was in Massachusetts as this industry was emergent over the last few years, because Connecticut's going to be 4 or 5 years behind Massachusetts.
Sure. Certainly each state, and then within each state, each municipality presents sort of its own challenges and nuances. With Massachusetts, it was a little tricky because we were oftentimes pursuing permitting on maybe 2 or 3 paths that weren't necessarily linear or particularly coordinated. So it was a little, there wasn't much of a roadmap. And to Massachusetts's credit, people were, this was happening real time. So we had certain towns that were very early responders and very proactive in enacting zoning, creating bylaws, and I think viewed this industry as an opportunity. And you know, as being an early responder, they wanted to be proactive and try and capture some of the revenue that's associated with it. I think we had other towns that were more hesitant and took much more of a cautious approach, a little bit sort of wait and see, and you know, certainly weren't showing a lot of initiative to you know, get businesses to open in town. And then I don't know how close you followed the roll in Massachusetts, but as the first, certainly the first retail stores opened, you know, there was a lot of press, probably a lot of consternation, a lot of traffic, a lot of that type of stuff. And it's, you know, I guess my opinion is probably biased, but it largely turned to be a lot of smoke and not much fire. And then as these businesses started to open and come online, and you know, I know you guys made analogies to liquor stores, and that's probably not a bad analogy. That's sort of, you know, what they started to become. And as more and more towns, you know, saw these stores opening, saw how heavily regulated they are in terms of both the product and the security, I think the comfort level in Mass has really increased. And you know, more and more towns are I think now sort of searching for this type of business, and that's really more on the retail side. On the cultivation side, from I guess from the town's perspective, a permitting perspective, you know, we found that to be a much easier road because there's no, you know, those aren't open to the public. So you know, your traffic issues and a lot of, I think that some of the concerns that came on with the retail stores didn't really come with the cultivation. The bigger challenge with the cultivation sites was just simply finding, you know, land that was real, land or buildings that was really suitable to house these kind of operations. You know, in Massachusetts, the standards that need to be met for both security and quality of product requires a pretty sophisticated build out. So it's not so simple as to just find a warehouse and throw some lights and some planters in there. It's much more complicated than that. And the other piece of I guess both of these puzzles was a lot of the way some of these towns put these uses, tried to use their existing zoning bylaws and fit the uses into it in terms of cultivation would largely be in a commercial or industrial zone. Retail would be in more of a commercial or business type of zone. Other towns created zoning overlay districts, and depending on how they did those districts, some of them became so sort of prohibitive that they really spot zoned it into just little corners and pockets of town. I think without a lot of sort of follow through thought on what kind of real estate was actually available there. And so a lot of times sort of, I guess, painted themselves into a corner where they created a set of regulations that left them with really no viable or very few viable options for actual locations. And then of course, the natural outcome of that was that any of those pieces of real estate that actually fell into those zones, you know, the pricing for that real estate just skyrocketed. So those towns really kind of bottlenecked. And then I guess the other big bottleneck that we ran into was in most towns, in Massachusetts, we have what's called a host community agreement, which is the contract that you sign with the town that speaks to the 3% of gross revenue that's paid to the town, other fees that are paid to the town, other benefits that are provided to the town, as well as obligations on behalf of the as us as an operator. And those agreements are, in Massachusetts, we have cities and we have towns, and they have different forms of government, but those agreements are often signed by a mayor or a board of selectmen. And then depending on how the zoning was written, oftentimes that would require a special permit that would either from a zoning board of appeals or from a planning board. And we oftentimes found ourselves in a little bit of a chicken and egg situation, because in one town we're about to open a store, we went to the mayor looking for a host community agreement, and he told us to go see the city council and get our special permit. And you can guess what the city council said when we tried to apply them for a special permit. They said, sure, you can apply as soon as you get the host community agreement from the mayor. And we lost probably 18 months, sort of playing that kind of back and forth. Once again, this was all evolving, but these were some of the challenges that we faced, and I imagine challenges that you guys will face as you're trying to draft your regulations. I could keep going, but I don't know how much time you have, and I don't know how, I don't want to go off on tangents.
So I have 3 questions based on what you just said, and I'm not sure if this is pertinent to you or one of your partners. You talked about the types of buildings that you look to erect or utilize. If you could talk a little bit about that. You also alluded to security issues and what security issues businesses in Massachusetts may have faced, and what steps, if you could talk about what steps have been taken to address public safety concerns. And then I have some curiosity about how you manage the indoor versus outdoor grow, certain mitigations that need to take place for that, and cross-pollination and quality controls.
Sure. So in regards to the type of buildings, once again, I don't believe Connecticut's established their standards, but in Massachusetts, we have the strictest quality standards, I believe, in the country. And so we have to be very careful about any kind of contamination from any kind of mold or any other inorganic products, I guess you would say. And so climate control becomes incredibly important because mold and humidity is it's all around us. It's everywhere. It's in the air. So controlling that becomes very challenging. And a lot of the places that would seem to be suitable for cultivation, older industrial style buildings that people wanted to retrofit, a lot of people had real challenges being able to create an environment that could ultimately produce product that would pass that testing. So the climate control, the HVAC systems, trying to retrofit these buildings was very challenging. We were successful in doing it because number one, the sort of the style of the building that we had lent itself to it, and number two, we frankly had a very talented design team. They came up with a very innovative system that thankfully seems to be working. But it's not so simple as just finding old industrial buildings and doing a fairly simple retrofit. And frankly, the same situation comes up for ground up construction. It's just your climate controls, your humidity controls in a Northeast environment. I mean, we all see the humidity we've experienced over the last couple of months. Trying to control that, with a plant that can't have any kind of mold or contamination on it is very tough. And then, in addition to that, we have as you guys saw, we have a greenhouse facility that's obviously much more open to the environment, although it's still a controlled environment. And there we've needed to use different techniques to be able to control our environment and produce product that will meet the quality standards. And we also have an outdoor cultivation area, obviously once again, you guys saw, and that product is probably more likely going to be used as biomass to create manufactured products like edibles, oils, tinctures, that type of thing, as opposed to directly consumable flower. But I guess point being that these cultivation facilities are complicated and cost a lot of time and money to design them and build them. So it does require a very significant investment on the part of the operator. So I think that's at least part of the answer to your question about the buildings. As far as security, I think I'll turn that over to Ron, who's our chief of security, and maybe he can give an overview of the level of security control that we have in all of our facilities in terms of how we monitor access, how we monitor surveillance, and then to some degree how we protect both the product and the cash. And then after that, I'll let Anthony speak to how we control control our environments. And I think also along the lines of security, Anthony can speak a little bit to how we control the security of our products as they go through the supply chain. So unless you guys want to ask questions about the building, I'll turn it over to Ron and let him speak to security. What would you prefer?
Anybody have any questions on infrastructure?
I had one question. I don't know how the Connecticut law is written, and I'm not sure if you alluded to this, but do you see a situation where you would have like the grill operation in the back and the retail in the front? Kind of, is that allowable or desirable?
It is in Massachusetts. There are municipalities where that's allowed. There are others where they separate the retail operation from the cultivation. In our case, our primary focus would be cultivation, but we would love the opportunity to have a small, sort of retail establishment in the front. I guess, you might picture an operating farm that then has a farm stand where they sell some of their products. So, something like that would be great.
Other questions? Well, let's turn it over to some questions. Oh, I'm sorry. Is that Ann?
Yes, this is Ann Gobin. Sorry if my line drops. My question really, I understand if you grow indoors, you can control the odor. If you grow outdoors, I wonder about the odor. And the reason I ask that question is from talking to air pollution control officials in states in the West where marijuana is grown outdoors. I understand when the plant flowers, there is an odor problem.
Odor mitigation is certainly an issue. I think I'm going to ask Anthony to answer that question because he's really more qualified than I am.
Good evening. Yeah, so odor mitigation indoor is definitely something that you can handle via carbon filtration and other techniques that can, mitigate the smells. Nothing can truly eliminate it indoors, but very well controlled greenhouse. And outdoor as well, since we're exchanging high volumes of air via either greenhouse controls or just straight outdoor plants, the smell can permeate depending on wind conditions and where the wind takes it and the time of year, right? So you're correct in saying that flowering plants will produce a smell. Those terpenes and chemicals that are on the plant are going to off gas in amounts that are relative to each day. As the sun comes up, things gas off. Is that a problem per se? From my side of things, if things are smelling, I'm doing a good job because that means that terpenes are present and cannabis is being grown properly. Just as flowers smell or any other agricultural product has a smell to it. I understand that smell may not be desirable sometimes, but it's non-intoxicating and it's non-toxic. So it doesn't present a problem necessarily other than the nuisance that some people may find it.
Yeah, it's a nuisance to neighbors depending on where you're located. And if we as the town get a lot of complaints over, and neighborhood nuisance, it becomes a problem to us.
It could be. It really depends on where you're trying to put the cultivation location, and in a high density residential area is probably, whether it's indoor, greenhouse, or outdoor is probably not recommended. So I would definitely, look to zone this somewhere in a commercial, industrial, or an agricultural area.
That leads me to believe it's a good business for indoors where you can put on controls.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll heavily use the word mitigate. So we currently, mitigate the odors that our indoor grow, as much as we can. But again, you're never going to eliminate. So there's some smell. But yes, if you were trying to compare and contrast the two, there will be more smells for an outdoor crop. However, that smell is only going to exist for about 45 days a year. As plants flower this time of year right now and are harvested. If the person or company was truly doing an outdoor crop, they would only be cultivating those plants, from spring to fall, and then the smell only really comes on in flowering. So you're talking about a 45-day window. So if we're talking about eliminating a licensee over a 45-day window of a nuisance smell that may or may not happen on a day. I think I think people are diving pretty deep in that regard, to be honest.
And does that answer your questions?
It confirms, I'll say, the knowledge and what I had heard from others, that you don't get the complaints with indoor grow operations. You do get the complaints with open field kind of grow operations. So if the location becomes important, if you're doing outdoor.
Any other questions on that? Okay, so can we talk about some of the security questions? Or can you run over some of the security protocols and the regulatory structure?
Certainly. Again, my name is Ron Lequier, and thanks for having us tonight. You asked, how do we address security concerns? I guess the best way to describe that is to show you or describe to you how we go through the process. Once we get a host community agreement, as a retired police officer, the first thing that I do is reach out to the local chief of police, introduce myself, and try to get a feel for his or her concerns about the cannabis industry, our particular site, traffic in that area, and maybe the particular neighborhood. Once I get a feel for his or her concerns, we start to develop security plans. Developed in that plan is a surveillance plan, access control plan, burglar and fire alarm plans. We'll put those together with a lot of thought, along with some security operating procedures. I'll present that to the chief. We'll sit down and go through those to make sure before we start construction that he or she is on board with that. Those plans are also presented to the local board, so we take input from the board. Something that's not mentioned often too is we meet with folks in the neighborhood. We do a community impact meeting. So we have an opportunity to sit down with folks from the neighborhood, get a feel for their concerns, usually educating them on the cannabis industry so they have an understanding what kind of an impact generally the industry is going to take or not take within their neighborhood. Once the plans are approved by the chief and local boards, then we begin the construction process. At the completion of that process, I bring the chief back through to make sure that we've addressed all his or her concerns. As you know, you spoke to earlier, it's a highly regulated industry, and really half of the regulations is security related. In Massachusetts, we go through two final inspections. The first inspection is predominantly all security related, and they go through each and every camera location, make sure we have sufficient burglary alarm coverage and sufficient access control to make sure that we're controlling the customer flow, we're controlling which employees have access to which locations.
Well, maybe you could just touch a little bit on, first of all, on-site consumption, and second of all, just a little bit more on, how much of the facility is covered by camera, battery, video backup, and how sort of much access control is in place.
Camera coverage, it's funny, both my brothers are in banking, and the camera coverage is very similar to a bank. I mean, we in Fitchburg, we bought a little pizza parlor and converted it, and he had maybe 6 cameras. And when we were done building it out to be a dispensary, we had 36 cameras. The regulations want us to have camera coverage anywhere cannabis is going to be, anywhere cash is going to be. We pretty much cover all operations, and it actually works out really well for us operationally as well as security concerns. The camera coverage has to be 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have to keep storage of at least 90 days of storage per regulation. We are well beyond that with the terabytes in our NVRs. Access control, the Cannabis Control Commission wants to limit access to certain areas, so only necessary personnel are in certain areas, like a vault where the product's being stored or where the cash is being stored. That access control is controlled, as you folks probably know, is with fobs or key cards. It gives us a digital record of who enters those areas, and it works out really well for us. Alarms. We have layers and layers of redundant alarms to delay access to the product. If someone decided they wanted to break into one of our facilities, that first layer of alarms would kick in to give the local police department plenty of time to respond. Did I miss anything, Rick?
Well, just, on-site consumption at this point
Thank
is
you.
something that is allowed in Massachusetts, and we're assuming wouldn't be allowed in Connecticut. So, I think initially people had ideas of, like people coming in, buying cannabis and then hanging around and having some kind of a party in the parking lot, and that that absolutely does not happen. So
we monitor. We have on-site security personnel. We hire our own, train our own, predominantly former law enforcement, corrections, and veterans. Those folks are monitoring the premises for on-site consumption. We have signage all about for no loitering, no on-site consumption. Allowing folks under 21 on the premises is also a violation of regulations. The way we set up our dispensaries, there is access control and locked vestibules like you'd see in a government building or a school. My security personnel will make sure the person outside appears safe, allow them into the vestibule. We'll confirm their ID. They have to have a valid government ID to get in the premises. We take an additional step of purchasing a high-end ID scanner that not only confirms the age of the individual, but it also validates that it's a government ID. It takes government IDs from countless countries, and that gives us that assurance that that person that's going in is not only 21 years of age, but it's not a fake ID. I'll give an example. We have a dispensary in Fitchburg I may have alluded to earlier. I described that ID scanner to the chief of police from Fitchburg State University, very happy that we spent the money on that scanner. And the first week we opened, and four Fitchburg State kids came in with fake IDs, and they were sent on their way.
So you guys have any questions on security?
Well, it's sort of related. I mean, obviously a cultivation operation would be private property. Nobody's allowed on there unless they're employees and stuff. But for retail, can you kind of describe the experience itself? I mean, is this like, as was alluded, the neighborhood package store, or is it Whole Foods or somewhere in between?
I would, from an access perspective, it's really more strict than a package store, because typically a package store, the doors are open, people are free to walk in, and their ID isn't checked until they actually come up to the register to try and purchase something. As Ron described in our store, when people walk in, they walk into a locked vestibule with a security agent who will check their ID and confirm that they're of age, and then they'll click a button and let the door that lets them enter into the store open. So the access is much more highly controlled, and they've got to pass through that same sort of double door access to leave, which allows us to control the flow of customers, so that we don't get inundated with people, so there's no opportunity for sort of like a group of people to I guess rush the store, for lack of a better term. Once you're inside the store, I think the environment is I'm not sure I would use Whole Foods as an example, but we try and create a very welcoming environment. It's a very user-friendly place where people are encouraged to shop, learn, educate themselves, and spend as much time as they'd like.
If I could just interject, Rick, some of the communities that we dealt with had concerns about the control of the flow of the customers coming in. By having those two locked doors in that vestibule gives my security folks the opportunity to confirm their identity, send them in one at a time, like Rick described. And then Rick also described them leaving through that same vestibule, so we can watch them leave and make sure they get out of the facility, but make sure there's no tailgating. Tailgating would be someone standing behind the first person in line and trying to sneak through that door. Another thing that we do is we check the ID again manually at the point of sale. So if for some reason someone was to sneak through the first layer of security, that ID would be caught at the cash register.
Yeah, I would call it regulated but refined. I think that we've done a very good job of fitting into the Sturbridge community, one of the toughest communities to probably put a retail cannabis facility into. We match the facade and all the, the needs of the town to be right on the main drag off the interchange there at the interstate. And we've been welcomed with open arms there and have done, everything we could have to satisfy their needs as them allowing these cannabis stores, 2 of them, into their town, and have definitely held up our end of the bargain in operating that store for about 6 months now.
Yeah, and access for a cultivation only facility, is obviously much more simple, because at that point, the entire facility, just to get into the parking lot, is typically an access controlled point, and it's employees only that would need, they would need that fob just, simply to get in the door. So there's no public coming and going in the cultivation areas.
One of the other things that I noticed about your retail establishment, and I'm not sure if this is statewide in Massachusetts or if this is a company policy, but you regulate the purchases. So no one person can buy more than X amount in a given period of time. Can you talk about that and whether that's a statewide policy or a company policy?
That's a statewide policy. So that's rules by the CCC. You can accumulate 1 ounce of flour, 5 grams of concentrate, or 500 milligrams of edibles, or a combination thereof in a equivalency standard, essentially. So 5 grams of concentrate is equivalent to 500 milligrams of edibles, or 28 grams of dried flour. And that is tracked both by an ID scanner at the front door to ensure that we are noticing if there are people coming, more than 1 time a day, because that is a 24-hour rule. So we pay attention if there are things like looping going on, where someone comes to visit our store at 11 a.m., 1 p.m., 3 p.m., so on and so forth. And we can notice not only that, our inventory controls in the computer system also makes us aware if someone is making multiple purchases a day and is trying to accumulate more than their fair share of cannabis. And our security personnel are always looking out for that as well.
How about the demographics of patrons and on the retail side?
Anthony, you want to go?
Sure. I mean, it obviously depends greatly on where the location is. In Fitchburg, it's a young demographic, predominantly, I would say 21 to 35, give or take. And in Sturbridge, it's the complete opposite. It's 60 and older, would be probably 75% of our consumer coming through those doors. And we're soon to open a store in Marlboro, which I think will probably be a good mix of both.
The skewing older demographic was my observation in Sturbridge as well. Any other questions or comments for these gentlemen?
Jason, it's Ann again.
Yep.
I'm curious a little bit on the order of things. What I heard was the preferred approach was to sign an agreement with the town, get the go-ahead, and later on talk to the police. It seems to me getting the input of the chief of police earlier as opposed to later would be beneficial.
So our preference would be, I guess, some level of coordination in the town. Like we would love for the town to tell us what order they would like us to go in. The biggest challenge we ran into was, there was no sort of linear path or pathway to follow. So if I were to be able to, to design a system for a municipality, I would, I guess, advocate for some type of a board that would have representatives of whatever government officials were going to weigh into this decision, and have that board make one decision rather than trying to go to 3 or 4 or 5 different boards that will make different decisions that may not necessarily coincide with the decision that was made by a different board in town. So that, for us, we would love to approach everybody simultaneously, get everybody's feedback, and come up with one plan that could be sort of approved universally in the town, rather than going from one institution to the other, and then trying to accommodate requests that sometimes conflict with one another.
I think that's great. And I think you can see Jason, our first selectman, is leaning that way. When we had talked about this at planning and zoning, we talked about the need before we approved anything or set on a path to talk to the police, because if you're calling them all the time, it's like, what's the relationship you're going to have with them? Or, how do things work? If somebody starts consuming product and driving, what does that mean to them? It's like, they're all things we don't know anything about.
Right. Well, the truth of the matter is, and I'll let Ron correct me if I'm wrong, but I think since we've opened any of our stores, we have barely ever had to call the police. Our engagement with the police is during the design and permitting process to make sure that we're putting security procedures in place that they're satisfied with. And fortunately, those procedures have been effective, and we've had very little need to actually call the police once the stores have been up and running. But I agree with you that
that's great. That's great.
It would be much more.
But I would rather know what they are worried about up front.
100% agree. So it would be much more efficient if we could engage with all of those people who want to have input in one sort of central location and be able to address everybody's concerns up front.
And if it's helpful, in one of the communities that we eventually got a host community agreement in, they didn't want us to speak to the chief of police at first, but we were trying to narrow down a site and we couldn't figure out, we weren't able to ask the chief. They eventually let us, but we weren't able to ask the chief if he approved that site or not. And he said, if you pursue this particular site, I'm telling you now that I can't support it. That early information allowed us to look for a better site that we finally landed on, and we got a host community agreement on.
So Ann's question kind of sparks one for me as well. And it's either a question for Ruth or Mike. Does the new law in Connecticut specify whether local approval needs to come before state approval or state approval before local, or do we know what that process is yet, or is that still being worked out?
What it says in the act is the final license application needs to include the local approval.
So the public act that was approved in Connecticut requires local approval of a site before final approval for a permit can be issued by DCP.
Before you can get your license to operate. Yep.
The state hasn't developed the licensing procedures yet. So the regulations from DCP and the process and how they're going to evaluate that's not yet been drafted. So they don't know what that's going to look like fully.
They have some time still, right? They've got like 7-8 months before they need to have that squared away.
That's the rub, because they passed the law and they put this on towns effective July 1, but they don't actually have the process identified at the state level yet. So that's been the main issue with this since it was adopted.
Hence the caps.
Right.
They don't want to be overwhelmed.
Jason, this is Ann. The reason we got into the discussion at planning and zoning was Mike flagged for us that there is the potential for an application to come in tomorrow and us not know what to do with it because so much is unknown at this point.
Commissioners?
Okay. All right. Well, my whole opinion on this is kind of a real unique situation where we're trying to create a zoning requirement for something that will apply to one person because of the regulation requirement that based on our town size, we can only have one dispensary, one grower. Right. So in a normal situation, you'd almost like this would have to go out like, on RFP, go out to bid. So does this get awarded to the first person who shows up at the door? Or do we entertain proposals from multiple applicants? They all put their presentation through, and then we as either, our combined committees decide which one puts the best application in, which one would best suit the needs of the town or be the best fit for the town. So that's why I'm saying it's kind of a hard thing to come up with a zoning regulation for one applicant, for one person.
So if I'm thinking about the point, a question that would come to mind.
I mean, we have to lay out kind of the base saying, okay, we want it in an industrial zone or a commercial zone. Maybe as a dispensary, you'd want it as a standalone building, that it's not part of a strip mall or in close proximity to other retails, kind of give some basic guidelines of where we'd like to see it, but then we'd have to kind of just open it up to applicants to, okay, tell me what your thoughts are, where would you want to go, how would you want to present this, and kind of make a decision that way, because if we're going to be limited to one, how do you decide, is it first guy at the door wins, or who's going to, put the best plan together for the town?
But I think the way to answer that question is actually a question for what's included in the special act pertaining to the special act, as I understand it, requires a host agreement. And it requires 3% of the gross sales revenue to come back to the municipality. Do we have further discretion as to what is included in that host agreement, or is the host agreement that the town of A shall be doing business with company 2, and the revenue shall be 3% of gross sales, and that's it? Because that is what the legislature tried to do with the solar stuff. They actually tried to require a host agreement and specified the terms. So the question that I would have then, to your point, Mike, would be, do we have latitude to include other conditions in a host agreement, or is it prescribed in the act?
Well, and it's more to if you have multiple parties interested in our town.
Well, so thinking about the question that I just posed, if the answer is no, the host agreement is what is involved in the act, then the answer to your question would be first in the door gets it.
If that's how the act was written.
If we're allowed other latitude, then I think you have a different, the answer is different.
I see there's two different issues actually.
Might have
what two issues?
So you're gonna zoning, to talk to planning and zoning specifically is enabling or disabling a location, right? And then the host agreement, and that's global, whether you're gonna have 1 or 17. So you get that in place or not, and then you entertain host agreements from whomever can fulfill the zoning, right? So if you can get a piece of property in a zone that has been enabled for this, then the host agreement, that's all the other stuff that goes on top of it.
So she's shaking her head.
Well, I'm just reading. It says there's a ban on certain actions and local host agreements. The bill prohibits municipalities or local officials from conditioning any official action on or accepting any donation from any cannabis establishment or applicant for cannabis establishment licenses in the municipality. The bill also bars municipalities from negotiating or entering into a local host agreement with a cannabis establishment or licensed applicant.
So we have to enter into an agreement is proscribed, is how I read that.
But still, the agreement is the agreement. The planning and zoning is something else.
Right. Mike, do you have any other comments on Ruth's point or Mike's point?
So I think, there are a couple of different points for how ultimately this is regulated. So towns will have to decide what they're going to do as far as passing legislation for, is this going to be banned on in-town parks? And those are all things the Board of Selectmen will do. That's not something that the zoning regulations will ever address. But to what Commissioner Kowalski is discussing, I'm sort of thinking, how could you do that if we wanted to head in that direction? And I think we might be able to get close, but probably not provide that as high a level of evaluation as we might want. But you, in theory, could create like a licensing ordinance. If the town has the ability to develop an ordinance that could all out prohibit it or allow it or whatever. And if the town created an ordinance that limited the total number of licenses and issued or came up with a sort of a process for how it would be issued, similar to the criteria of a special permit, I think that you could essentially have what would be not an RFP, but you could essentially have proposals submitted. You know, it wouldn't be exactly the same, but the way we would do that on the zoning side would be to create some type of an overlay zone that just allowed them everywhere so that they could come in and we could evaluate them on a site-by-site basis. But we have too many zones in town, and the way that certain uses like alcohol are treated in different zones is different. So we'd have to come up with some of that evaluation criteria.
So then the way I understand that is that the legislators put out that there's only going to be allowed one per town for a short period of time until they get 3 years. And then it can open up to, you can have one on every corner, you know, like package stores all over the place.
Package stores are restricted by population. You can only have so many package stores per, I think it's 2,500 people. It's one package store per 2,500 people in statute.
Okay.
Or whatever that number is, maybe it's 2,000, maybe it's 3,000, but you can't have, East Windsor can't have 15 package stores. We don't have enough population for it.
Okay, so eventually there'll still be a determining number based on population.
If they follow that same model, yeah.
I thought that there was also in our earlier discussions that they weren't currently allowing the cultivation and the distribution at the same location. Is that correct?
I'll have to look that one up for you. I thought
It was kind of presented to us that there would be, you know, one cultivator, one distributor, one transporter. So if one applicant takes up both classifications, is that allowed?
That's speaking to the number of licenses issued per municipality. So if you had I don't know, if you had a 60,000 square foot building and they were going to use 50,000 square feet of it for cultivation and 10,000 for retail sales, they had 2 licenses, one for retail sales, one for cultivation, you're done. That's all she wrote. But there's nothing, as I understand it, you can have a license, more than one license on the same parcel.
And that is true. And the cap is on micro cultivators and retail. Doesn't speak to the other licenses. And then when you read a little bit more into it, it's like layering. You're layering another. You have your license to cultivate. Now I want to layer it with a license to manufacture, and you know, you could, if they're vertically integrated at local roots, you could have several licenses.
But if that weren't the case, we could have one company that was a micro cultivator on one parcel, and you know, on the other end of the zone, we could have somebody who was doing the dispensing, distribution, the dispensing.
Well, I'm just thinking from a zoning aspect, you'd want the cultivation in a different location than you would necessarily say for a dispensary. So if we're trying to combine both, it makes it more difficult to come up with a zoning requirement that is suitable for both operations.
Why would you?
Well, why? I guess I'm new on the board and everything, but for me, as far as security goes, and wouldn't you want them all in one location? Now the police, if there's a problem, are responding to one location, not here or down the street. They're all in one spot, and doing the tour and going there, they run a very tight operation as far as nobody can get in unless you have a key fob. You have to have it's fenced, it's gated. Just a grow operation, you have to walk through bleach to get in. The filters on this place, the HVAC system, it's unbelievable. It's like, I mean, I was very, very impressed. I figured I was going to go see, and you know, just this crazy pot plants hanging everywhere. I mean, just downright spotless. The people that worked at the grow facility, so knowledgeable. Their head grower, I guess. I mean, this young man was quite impressive about how he grows and how the dirt. They had previously tried to grow outdoor under greenhouses in the ground, gave it up. They were in potted plants, and of course, I don't know a lot about pot. Maybe it smells when it buds, but they had 3 probably 120-foot long greenhouses with just rows of potted, that were probably 4 or 5 feet high. Just super organized. I mean, the water, I mean, it was nothing I could imagine. And I mean, my head was going crazy. Then when we go to the store, it was like walking into Evergreen. The place was gorgeous. Counter, wood, the ladies working there, and the gentlemen, I guess. Whatever you asked them, they could answer. They're so passionate about their product, and then all the products in a back room, only one person handles it. You put your order in, it comes up on the screen, it comes out in a bag, they go through your whole order. I mean, it just, the whole operation, turnkey is top notch, the one I went to. These gentlemen already have, they're vested in our town. They did a lot of work in the industrial park. They put the road in to connect where the mushroom factory was. They used to own the mushroom factory. They have land all around there. To me, it's the perfect place. There's no small communities. You're not gonna have, I mean, they back the state. That'll never be anything but state property. I think these men are vested already in our town.
That's one example. But what I'm just thinking is, as far as us writing regulations, then if somebody, then, after the 3-year moratorium, if somebody comes to us and say, well, I don't want all that, I just want a retail store. So do I have to be in the industrial park to put my retail store in? Or can I go on Route 5 and put retail store in? So that's where we have to kind of separate, even though they want to do it all together. That's
Well, they don't. I'm not saying they do. I don't know their plans. Or
that's one of those things like, okay, they're both allowable here, but if you want to separate off just the retail, where else? Is there other places we want to have it or not? Or do we want to keep it all in an industrial area?
Well,
those are the decisions that
I think to
probably does. Mike?
I think to Commissioner Kowalski's point, the way that I would think about it is we might find it appropriate for a cultivator in an industrial zone to have a retail operation, but we would probably not think it to be appropriate for a retail operation to then establish a cultivating operation. So we would have to, we could allow them to kind of establish that as an accessory, but the actual location of where that initial license is landed, we would have to do it by zone based on license type, if I'm understanding him correctly.
I think that's a very good way of making that designation or that distinction. So I guess I was, in terms of citing of retail stuff, like let's park the cultivation question. In terms of citing a retail establishment, how did we cite LNK, the CBD place?
That never came before us.
How did that not come before?
They did that by right somehow. That never came before us.
Okay, so what's that?
Nothing.
So that's what we were quite surprised, is like, and they just considered it as general retail because it's not as highly regulated as the cannabis side of it. So they looked at it and saying it's like them selling soap. It was a shocker.
I didn't expect that to be the answer to that question.
It was a shocker to us also, because we thought that there should have been at least some consideration as to that it's not just general retail.
It's right next to a school bus yard.
Okay. Well, that's and that's where I kind of mentioned the whole thought of like, okay, if we're talking just retail, I think it should be a standalone building, because if you try to put it in a strip mall that's next to, a toy store, anything. I've been by one location up in Lee, Massachusetts, and there was quite a considerable line out the door. So you had a queue of people and queue of cars, which, if again, depending on location, could cause traffic issues, or even the way they describe their security reasons. They are queuing people up outside. They're allowing one person in at a time to get vetted and screened. So you could definitely have, a queue of people.
So that's a good question. for the gentleman from Massachusetts, do you still have those queuing issues outside of the establishment, or was that kind of like the initial novelty of the availability?
I think it was largely the store. I think Lee was one of the first stores to open. So that is greatly dissipated, but I'll let Ron speak more specifically to our experiences at our stores.
You're on mute.
You're muted, Ron.
Sorry about that. Leicester was the first location to have the retail place in Massachusetts. I was still on the police department at that time, but I knew I was getting into the cannabis industry. So my chief and I were kind of watching what was going on there. That was like, and Rick alluded to it earlier, it was kind of blown out of proportion. Shortly after that, every dispensary after that, it was well controlled. We had no issues at all with lines at our facilities, and we've got a system in place where we have an idea when the busy times are. We just increased the number of cash registers. We don't have lines outside. Post-COVID, we're able to allow, half a dozen, 8 people inside the retail space. It's comfortable. We're not controlling lines outside any longer. It's just a non-issue at this point.
Yeah, Connecticut may see a surge as any new business emerges, right? You're going to see people be excited about having access to legal cannabis, and you're going to see a surge of excitement around a new store opening in a city. And within a week or two, that excitement wanes and it's normal business.
You should expect on the initial opening that we're going to have a huge surge.
And I will tell you the store in Sturbridge, actually, it looks like a Dunkin' Donuts from the outside. They actually have another business, a grinder shop or something moving in, right?
Yeah, we've got a
there's more business that they're bringing in. And but if you're telling them it's standalone, that's it.
And at the beginning of our business, every time we've opened a new store, we have police detail. Ron can speak to it more if you want to speak to it, Ron, what we do at store openings.
Yeah, so we obviously, right before opening, we're about to open in Marlborough. So I'll be reaching out to the chief of police in Marlborough soon, and we'll have conversations about police details. We've already had several conversations on it. The longer the industry is in the state, the less there's a need for that. But just as a precaution, we bring some police details on for that first week. We keep lines of communication open with the chief of police. And once we realize there's no need for it, then we wean ourselves off of those police details. We also do something I call a soft opening, where we just open the doors one day without this huge grand opening and fanfare. And there's a bunch of benefits to that. There's a good training aspect in that, where our employees have an opportunity to have a very slow day or a few days, and it gives them a chance to get some reps on the point of sales. My new security people an opportunity to process a very few customers. We'll invite people to make sure that people do show up. And then it begins that word of mouth, and then we start to get more and more customers. And then we usually do that for about a week, and then we'll have a grand opening on a Saturday. Again, no fanfare, just a notice that we're going to open on that day. We did it in Sturbridge. It was calm. The police officer never had to stop traffic. And we're right on Route 20 in Sturbridge, and never had to step into the roadway to stop traffic to let customers out.
While we're talking about that, there is a little blurb here from the bill. It allows municipalities for the first 30 days after cannabis retailers or hybrid retailers, that's medical and recreation, open, to charge them up to $50,000 for any necessary and reasonable municipal costs for public safety services related to the opening.
So if there's a need for overtime expenses with police, they cover it.
I mean, honestly, you had me at 3%. I'm sorry, but
so no, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That could do a lot of good in this town.
So Rick, can I ask, with the cultivation, with the vertical integration you did in Massachusetts, how many jobs did that create?
Sure, I can let Charlie speak to the number of jobs, as well as I think some of the economic benefits that are provided to the town. Of course, the one thing to be aware of here is the economic benefits as well as the jobs are going to be directly tied to the size of the facility. So it's been a little hard for me to follow, but I've heard you guys talking about just a micro facility. So is that the only thing that's going to be available in your town? 10,000 square feet or less?
As the cap is worded, we're allowed one micro cultivator, one retailer until 2024 when they lift the cap.
But does that mean that's all you're allowed, or that means that's the minimum that you have to have?
No, that's all we're allowed.
Category, the minimum is 2,000 square feet of grow space up to 10,000. And then the full cultivator is, I think they started at more than 15.
And if we wanted to be a full cultivator, is there going to be an opportunity for that?
Over time, yes, but as we understand, I'm going to speak for Ruth here. As I understand the bill right now, they're not allowing full cultivators until 2024. It's micro across the board with a set number based on population until the cap is lifted in 2024. Do I understand that correctly, Ruth?
That's like a tough one to needle through to figure out, because I was asking the same question. The cap is just on those two. Well, what about the other 7 licenses that they can give out? And it looks like you can layer. Like you get your first, you get your initial license, and then add more. So I can't give you the exact answer because I don't know it, but intuitively I'd say, yeah, you'd be phasing up.
In the case of East Windsor, the worst case scenario is there's room to grow, if you'll pardon the pun, over a 3-year period.
Okay, because I mean, sounds like we'll need to understand that a little better. I mean, frankly, if the entire state of Connecticut needs to be served by grow facilities that are 10,000 square feet or less, you're going to have one hell of a segmented and very difficult market down there. But obviously, you guys don't control the state regulations. You know, our interest would certainly be in something more substantial than that. So, to answer your question, I guess we'll assume that we're at some level of market maturity where we could have you know, a more reasonable size cultivation operation, and I guess I can let Charlie speak a little bit about what kind of employment opportunities that might provide, and as well as what kind of economic benefits would flow through to the town.
So if I could just jump in, I am also reading through what I have, and I don't know that there's anything definitive, but I think that the reason for the cap is related to that as they were mentioning, the towns becoming overwhelmed with a large number in any one place, and so they want to make sure that they're established essentially across the state. I think that the micro cultivators are capped because of the size and the fact that they'd be much easier to establish. So a full-size cultivator that may need 50,000, 100,000 square feet or whatever, those obviously are not going to pop up on every street corner because you can't site that kind of a building anywhere. I haven't seen anything that would limit that, and I agree statewide that would be a little bit strange, but it's certainly something we can run down and verify.
Okay, yeah, we would definitely need to understand that a little better. I mean, I could just tell you that the market's not going to function with a bunch of people growing that small. It'll be the most expensive cannabis in the history of the world.
Welcome to Connecticut.
Keep right up with our gas prices.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, I was going to give some context around, you know, obviously kind of revenue potential and economic, you know, opportunity and job creation at the level that we would like to operate at. I mean, you know, I would say we would target, you know, a cultivation facility in the 40 to 50,000 square foot range. You know, on top of that, have, you know, 10,000 square feet of manufacturing space. You know, and roughly that would equate to, you know, $30 to $40 million in potential revenue, in wholesale revenue, and, you know, roughly 40 to 50, you know, jobs. So, I mean, looking at our vertical operation in Massachusetts with our 2 cultivation sites, you know, our 3 retail stores, we will be employing, over 100 people, by the end of the year. So obviously, getting to that scale, that 40 to 50,000 square foot, grow, canopy, with manufacturing, it would be necessary to get to that scale to hit that, those types of revenue numbers that we discussed, when you guys were visiting. The micro, just to give you a sense on a micro license, we'd have to, I'd have to run some numbers, and obviously it'll, depend on kind of market dynamics and price per pound of product. But I mean, you're still probably looking at, a $5 million a year business. And Anthony could probably, give me a better sense at that size, what, the labor needs would be on cultivation. But I would assume it's probably, 15 to 20 jobs, between cultivation and manufacturing at that scale, maybe a little less. But yeah, I think to Rick's point, we would certainly really want to understand, the opportunity and the cap sizes, especially as it relates to canopy and cultivation, and obviously, that'll impact economic opportunity and job creation pretty significantly.
Yeah, those job numbers seem pretty consistent with what we would see across the board. And to speak more on just the scalability of things, economies of scale come into this process as well. The reason, it's not just because we want to make more money, we're going into these places and wanting to generate a bunch of revenue. When we do these types of jobs, going at 2,000 or 5,000 square feet of project development requires a lot of mobilization, and realistically we have to have line of sight on building the infrastructure up at the beginning in order to facilitate a larger grow down the road. And there has to be line of sight on that, because there's just such a heavy investment into utility upgrades and all the property things that have to happen with a site like a cannabis site. So that's why we're wondering, what are the opportunities to scale up, and how far away is that, in order to be able to have an idea for the scale of our business, or any person should be asking these questions. Any business should be asking those questions.
Yeah, and Rick, I mean, I don't know if you want to speak to it, but I mean, in terms of, access to real estate and land, I know the property that, Rick and the partners, own in East Windsor is, fairly significant. So, I mean, we would have plenty of, we wouldn't have space or infrastructure constraints, based on, the size of the property.
Yeah, that's correct. We've got plenty of land, and I think it's well suited for all the infrastructure needs that we'll have.
Other questions or comments from anybody? Nobody? Has this conversation been helpful?
Yeah. I agree. But I think we got to get more clarification on what we can do based upon the regulations, because right now it looks like they want to come in with a much larger development than what we're able to until after 2024. So I think we need to get that clarification sooner than later. But I'm with Joey. 3% for East Windsor is a windfall for us. So whatever we have to do to make sure we're in place so that we can move forward with something, I think it's in our best interest. That's my personal opinion.
And I do want to say, our goal here will be to work within the framework of the regulations. And if we need to, scale something over time, then, that's something that we'll certainly consider. But it will be difficult to make the investment necessary to build a scaled facility when you're only building, 5,000 or 10,000 square feet, if you don't have some line of sight of what that's going to be. But that being said, the regulations will be the regulations, and you tell us the rules and we'll play.
Yeah, Rick, I think we're still trying to figure out, we're still building the plane while it's flying too. So the law is out, but when laws are written, there's ambiguity from time to time. So the good news is, between Ruth and Mike, I've got confidence that we can at least figure out what we think it says. And the boards can make some determinations at that point. I want to thank you and your team for taking the time to be with us this evening. The visit last week I found to be enlightening, and the conversation tonight just as much so. So thank you guys very, very much.
Yeah, and we'd like to thank you for the opportunity to come and speak, and we'd like to offer our help as you guys navigate your way through this process. If there's any kind of feedback that we can provide, please, whether we wind up setting a business there or not, certainly happy to help either way.
Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's probably the weightier of the two topics to talk about this evening. But the other one that I know my board thought was appropriate to have, and at the staff level, Ruth and Mike and I have talked, and it made sense to have a conversation about solar developments and where we're going collectively on that. Everybody knows that gravel pit solar has been approved and cited, and they're just about to start their site work, and that's moving forward. And it's going to be the largest grid scale solar development in New England, which is a great win for the town of East Windsor. They're going to become one of our top taxpayers, possibly soon to be replaced. East Windsor has become an attractive location for other solar projects. Since I've been in office, I think we've been approached seriously by 6 projects. There is a saturation point. And I'm not sure where that saturation point is, but I thought it was a good idea for everybody to kind of share their thoughts on where we were. I'll tell you, without disclosing details, the Board of Selectmen just rejected an offer from another company to do an expansion project or a phase 2 of a project, because it wasn't economically in our interest to do so. But we should have a conversation about, and full disclosure, the Planning and Zoning Commission almost never has jurisdiction over blocking one of these things because it's cited by the state siting council. But nonetheless, if we send a concerted message to the state about what East Windsor wants our solar strategy to be, I think that does still carry some weight. And even though the PZC doesn't have a role in that officially, I think if the two boards are on the same page, I think that still is a valuable message to send. I personally am all in on the concept of renewable energy. I think that's good for the environment. I think it's good for the economy. I think it's a good reuse of appropriate parcels. I don't love the idea at all of it gobbling up prime farmland soils. I think that is a waste of a resource. I think that also the major talking point that you'll hear from solar companies is that after the end of the useful project, after the useful life of the project, you can decommission it and return it to its previous state, which sounds nice, but the technology hasn't been around long enough to do that. So nobody really knows if that's a possibility or what the cost will be. Secondly, the American economic system is not built on this notion of, I'm making money for 30 years, my time is up, I'm going to stop making money now. That's just not how capitalism works. So I think that it would be appropriate for us to send a signal that we have done our part in terms of being Connecticut reaching our energy efficiency goals, and it's time for people to look elsewhere. I think 125 megawatts on the gravel pit project puts us far and away. And Mike, you can speak with more accuracy to this, but I believe that will make us the host of not only the largest grid scale solar project in Connecticut, but also the largest host of megawatts in total in Connecticut. There's a couple of southeastern Connecticut towns that I think may be close, but no, I'm going to take that back. Nobody's got anything close to us.
No, when I was running the numbers for the spreadsheet that I sent you, we're way out in front. I mean, yeah, statewide, but even I think regionally. And there has been some discussion at the state level about, to your point about prime ag soils and solar is potentially a good use for a farm that's no longer farming, right? So we might want to use that as an option if farming is off the table, but we don't want solar to be the option in lieu of farming. So there was a law, I don't know the specifics, but there was an act that was passed, I think in 2017 or 2018, which gives DEEP greater authority to review some of the environmental impacts on projects greater than 2 megawatts in size, specifically because of what you're discussing now.
So that the act you're talking about is Public Act 17-218, and it does two things. It gives, it requires that for any project that's going through the full certification process, that the siting council consider the impacts on prime farmland soils and core forests. And if they're going through the declaratory process, which is basically the express lane for siting solar projects, requires that both the commissioners of DEEP and agriculture indicate that there is no material impact on those two subjects, core forest or prime farmland soils. But the problem is that they don't define what a material impact is. So both agencies have spent the last 4 years trying to figure that out. So that was an attempt by the legislature to kind of slow the roll on grid scale projects that has not, there are more questions than it resolved. I think that it would be, you know, we have 2 locations in town currently that I think are wholly appropriate for grid scale solar projects. The first being gravel pit solar, which is on a way over excavated gravel pit. I mean, it looks like the spot where they shot the moon landing. It's crazy. You can't do anything else with it. There's no infrastructure there. It's either a gravel pit or it's not going to be anything. So the other place is the landfill. The guy's Lodestar. Lodestar put solar panels on a dump. I mean, that's a good reuse of otherwise dead soil. I don't want us to be complicit anymore in seeing open space or agricultural soils consumed by. We've done our part, is my point. And I wanted to make sure that, or hear out other perspectives if there are. And actually, well, I'll stop there.
But Jason, if I could just add one more thing to your point, looking at the list that I sent you quickly. So once gravel pit solar comes online, we will be at 138.9 megawatt output. It looks like the next closest town is North Stonington, and they're at 30.
Yeah, we've done our part.
I totally agree. I mean, it's kind of a frustrating thing when these come before our board and we have no say in it. They just informing us what's going to happen. And I think East Road was another one that we thought that was prime farmland that they're going to take and put solar panels on. And I think you're hearing that as a public outcry too, that we don't want to be known. We were known as a farming town, not a solar town, and we're kind of losing that as more and more of these are going up. Gravel pit is absolutely the best location to put one, and I think if we have more places like that, then those are the areas that, you know, I would hope that a town could recommend to say, okay, you know, we have these areas that we deem are great viable candidates for solar, but not just to allow people to, you know, where is the easiest, nicest, flattest piece of land to erect their arrays and run.
Jason, this is Ann. I concur with what Mike is saying, that it's taking away the gravel pit solar on the landfill. Those are fantastic solar projects. But as we chew up our agricultural land as solar farms, we change the character of the town. And if we were to get another big box store, you know, like we have the Walmart and the new, I'll call it lumber supply place, rooftop solar on those, I think is a good place for it. If DOT wants to put it along the side of the highway, like they do in Massachusetts in the median, you know, or on the edges of the highway, that's not chewing up usable land. But to change our character and lose our farmland just because it abuts transmission lines changes our town. And I don't think for the good, when there's plenty of other places to put solar.
And we share the same frustration as you guys do with not having a say. And, you know, we've looked at it, and of course, we've been involved in, you know, the financial aspects of it. So there's 3 things we can do. 1, go complain at the siting council. 2, have our legislators make noise and try to get the laws changed. And 3, what we are currently doing is trying to mitigate the pain by getting some sort of financial consideration for it, which isn't always possible, like you just alluded to. So, I mean, I think that's something maybe we can do more proactively is actively speak against certain projects at the siting council, not just officially, but also as residents.
I think officially carries some weight too there.
Yeah,
I think they are responsive to that. When we submitted testimony in support of the gravel pit application, just because of its size, they were paying careful attention to the position of the town. But one of the things that I heard as feedback after the fact was that our support carried some weight with that. And I don't think that's always the case with the public hearing process, but I was impressed that the siting council seemed to take particular note of that.
Just maybe an unrelated topic, but you know, we're just talking about going into a electric purchasing agreement. Once gravel pit solar comes on, I mean, is that a viable candidate that we could go into an agreement to buy power from them?
That's not how those work. So gravel pit has an agreement to sell power to the grid. We would have to buy it. We could negotiate, or we could have negotiated a power purchase agreement for the town, capital T, not residents.
Right.
So it would have been for municipal buildings, school buildings, and the like. The alternative, and what the board opted for, was a higher price per megawatt in terms of annual revenue, because there are lots and lots and lots of options for power purchase agreements, and getting the actual realized tax revenue was a one-off. There was one opportunity for that, whereas you can, you know, walk through the halls of the legislative office building and throw a rock and hit a guy who's going to be selling the power.
And honestly, like per kilowatt, with our current power purchase agreement, it almost floored them. They're not even close. They were 14.5, 15 per kilowatt. We're at 7 right now.
Right.
We get a really good going the way we go. And this will be my second power purchase agreement. We get a rocking deal. And you know, I mean,
that's, yeah,
you know,
and you still end up, even with a PPA, you still end up paying transmission and delivery costs. So the only way really to have a material impact on your electric bill is you got to put fuel cells in each of the facilities that are going to be taken off the grid. You got to be able to store the power where it's going to be used. So unless you're putting in fuel cells, it's 8 different locations. The power purchase agreement that we do through CCM is the best deal going. So I'm going to throw something out there, and unless there's opposition to it, I'd like to draft a letter that could be co-signed by the 2 boards to be sent to CCM, no, the siting council, for the record, indicating some of the points that Ann laid out about, you know, and Mike too, about where it would be appropriate to do something like this. But we're pretty much done with gobbling up our open flat space. You know, I mean, and it'll be worded much more articulately than that, but the general gist is we've done our part. It's time for somebody else to. Anybody have opposition to that? Oh, we lost Ann. We'll say she agreed to then.
I would say.
Anybody else have anything on marijuana or solar? Hi.
I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Jim Stanton, and I own 225 South Main Street, Route 5, corner of Abbey Road. And recently I just gave my surveys to an engineer, and I told him to keep the corner for a possible cannabis, future cannabis building. I haven't pursued it too much yet with the town. I've met with Lynn Norton over a couple of times, but with COVID and everything, it kind of slowed everything up. And the reason I met with him is because the town and the state drains all their water onto my property.
I've been mentioning it to different people for 35 years. I haven't gotten too far, and I'm still not getting too far, but I guess I'm going to end up paying for the drainage. So we're working on that. But I just wanted to introduce myself because I came tonight to, because I'm interested in the cannabis business, not as the business person, but as the building person. And I think that if there's other companies that are interested in East Windsor, I can be on site, get the building up, get it running, build it at a reasonable price. I already own the land, so I think I can attract, have an attractive deal for somebody that's interested and maybe doesn't already own land in Connecticut or, East Windsor. I kind of got the idea over the last couple of years from a friend of mine who is leasing a building in Taunton, Mass, or took a deposit for a lease in Taunton, Mass, and he's going to eliminate a convenience store and liquor store, and it's going to turn into a cannabis store eventually. I also toured a building that's under construction. It's due to open up in the next 30 days in Westport, Mass. That was the ugliest building I've seen so far. A friend of mine's building it with partners. They're spending $5 million, and they're going to be in manufacturing and sales, but the sales are only about 1,000 square feet. It's very small, probably less than this room here, I think. Yeah. And I toured another building that's the prettiest building probably in New England, called United Cultivation in Ashby, Mass. I drove up there to look at their building. And they have a really pretty building. It's a steel building, but they did a lot of wood in the front and a lot of stone around it. So it makes it look more country. Ashby's fairly country too. And so some combination in there. I mean, I don't really like building ugly steel buildings, not on Route 5 anyway. I will do what I have to do, but I wouldn't probably build an ugly building there. I couldn't take it, I had to build something a little bit nicer than everybody else, otherwise I'm not happy. So I just wanted to say hello, introduce myself, tell you that there is somebody else in town interested. I've been here since 1979, paying taxes since 1980. And
what'd you do the first year?
What's that?
We didn't talk about that. What'd you do the first year?
I rented from Larry Triple.
Okay.
I was living in his family's house until he tore it down. I had to move back home, and then I bought a house here. So. And then I bought more properties too. I've owned that property since 1982. I've been kind of saving that corner. I probably should have put self-storage places in 20 years ago, but it's mind-boggling to me that more people keep needing more storage. I just don't understand that business, but
Thank you for not doing that. Thank you for not doing that.
So I have some ideas. I'm hoping that maybe I can accommodate small businesses in the corner and so forth, keeping in the back of the property, keeping the corner for something special. And I felt as though I could build a very special looking building, probably like 6 to 8, 12,000 square feet. The other two buildings that I looked at, the one in Ashby, they're only retailing right now, but they have the building built big enough so they can grow their own. And they told me that they would start probably this winter growing their own products. And the company in Westport, Mass, which is called Coastal Healing LLC, is run by a friend of mine who's a orthopedic surgeon. And after 30 years, his hand's bothering him, so he can't really operate anymore. So he's transitioning into that business with a biologist as a partner. And they'll probably have about 20 employees, and they'll be growing their products eventually. I looked at the building, and it's like, they have like a building room this big, only like 4 stories taller. And it's grown on racks. It's like all automated and crazy stuff. And, but they need room for processing the plants and then also making candy and gummies. I'm not really a, a user, but I kind of understand it. And I've read a lot about the medical benefits to marijuana, so I kind of like that. I'm like this on the other stuff, but hey, it can't be any worse than alcohol, right? So I'm okay with that. I just wanted to say hello and say that there's other people that might be interested. And I had one inquiry. I've had it on Craigslist that I felt as though my site lends itself to a site because it's a former tobacco farm. And behind me is Los Nellis Tobacco Farm. Across the street is Mercury Excel Windows Manufacturing, which I helped bring to town in 1990 or so, 89 or 90. Across the street is Baggett's, Tom and Doug Baggett's farm, Dunkin' Donuts, car dealer. So I'm not really surrounded by a lot of condos, apartments, or houses. Very kind of an industrial spot, which doesn't sell to normal retail. Been told over the years. I had it approved for retail years ago, but they wouldn't at that time let anything go upstairs, and I didn't like building the strip mall type of thing. I wanted to have a 2-story just for the aesthetics, and I felt as though you really need to use the upstairs in order to make it really work. And at that time, that wasn't allowed in town. Of course, Jonathan Pascoe's project showed us that it does work very well.
Yeah, mixed-use development.
They have like 2 and 3 stories over there, and everything looks like every square inch looks like it's rented. It's like a wonderful little development. So I'm hoping to get something started soon on my project. On my property, I have 4 acres there, and I'm hoping to do like a mixed use, like maybe offices, cannabis on the corner if the right company comes along. In the back part, small businesses. Possibly, I've been also looking at, since there's very little self-storage with climate control, I might do something like that too. So I just wanted to say hello and thank you for all your hard work. And I think you'll probably hopefully be seeing me soon.
So Mr. Stanton, thank you very much for coming. I'm going to give you one of my cards. Maybe you, Ruth, and I can set up a conversation for sometime next week or so.
Yeah.
To talk about how we can be helpful.
Okay.
What you heard tonight in terms of the discussion around marijuana was a conceptual conversation.
Right.
We don't know what we're doing yet.
Right.
That's the conversation was intended to get the 2 boards on the same page, and also recognize that professional staff still has a lot of work to do before we're going to get to there. But I think based on just what you shared with us, I think that a conversation offline with Ruth and I could yield to some opportunities.
Well, I felt a little sad because I'm thinking, oh boy, I can't compete with those guys, but on the other hand, this may be too small of a market for them. I don't know. And in the beginning anyway, because if they need 50,000 square feet, if it's not allowable, then I might be able to fit in here and they come in later, because it's going to be a growing market, and if the state of Connecticut's moving really slow on it. So hopefully everybody gets room to fit in there somewhere.
Well, please reach out. Let's see if we can set something up in the next few days.
Thank you. Good night.
Okay.
Probably give him an application to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Seems like he's got a lot of experience with it.
I think he lives in India.
Oh, does he?
Is it
He doesn't live in these ones.
related to Scott?
No.
Really?
Really?
Wow. Okay. Peg, how are you doing? You want a break? You want to power through?
Sure.
Okay. Next up, folks, if you want to take off your welcome to.
If you didn't notice, I was sleeping. Another guy was talking.
Good night, Joe.
Thank you very much for the invite.
Thanks for coming. I appreciate it. Joe's been up for 21 hours, so he's tired. So, you know what, in the interest of Mike's time, if we could take up agenda item 9F. That's him. I think that's the last thing that involves our planning staff.
I haven't been up for 21 hours, but I will be just as appreciative, I promise.
Make a motion to take item 9F out of order.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Mike.
Okay, so not too long ago, I presented to you guys that we were submitting an application for an affordable housing grant, or affordable housing plan technical assistance grant with the Department of Housing. A couple of weeks ago, we found out that we were awarded the full amount, and the Department of Housing requires a resolution to submit the grant, which you did, and they now require a resolution authorizing us to execute the notice of grant award. So the application and everything has been submitted and finalized. Assuming the resolution is adopted, it'll go to the Department of Housing for review, and we will have until October of 2022 to complete the project.
Will the 15,000 cover the cost of the project?
I happen to know a consulting firm that is more than able to write it for less than 15,000.
Is the consulting firm of which you are aware able to write it for 15,000?
Yeah, we've done, I think we have 8 of these either completed or in progress, and all of them have been at or below 15.
So Mike prepared a resolution authorizing adoption. I changed it because I think the charter requires that I'm the signatory. So if somebody wanted to read it, or okay, yeah, so we need to update that too. That's no problem. That's no big deal. What's today's date? It's the 2nd, so tomorrow will be the 3rd. Anderson has executed this. I won't execute it in front of Amy until tomorrow, so it's the 3rd. So does somebody want to make a motion?
You want me to read it?
Okay.
Make a motion to authorize a resolution of the execution of the notice of grant award to the Connecticut State Department of Housing. Whereas the state of Connecticut's Department of Housing has made monies available for community seeking assistance to prepare and adopt an affordable housing plan pursuant to the provisions of the Connecticut State General Statutes 8-30J. And whereas East Windsor is required to prepare and adopt an affordable housing plan. And whereas the town of East Windsor was notified on August 17, 2021 that the Department of Housing has awarded $15,000 to the town for the purposes of preparing an affordable housing plan. Now therefore be it resolved by the East Windsor Board of Selectmen that has been made aware that the notice of grant award by the Connecticut Department of Housing for the Affordable Housing Grant Plan Grant Technical Assistance Program and resolved effective September 3rd. Or no, September 2nd, 2021, to authorize the first selectman, Jason Bowser, to execute the notice of grant award for the Affordable Housing Plan Grant Technical Assistance Program dated September 1 to 2021, to execute amendments, revisions, and revisions thereto, to implement project activities if approved, and to act as authorized representative of the town of East Windsor and execute any other agreement or contract relative to said project. Dated this 2nd day of September 2021, East Windsor Board of Selectmen. In witness thereof, the undersigned is executed. No, but I don't need to read that.
Motion has been made. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been seconded. Any discussion? Mike, thank you for your work in getting this done and kind of leading us to water on this. And I'm glad that we'll be able to put it to good use. So thank you for your help.
No problem. Thanks for getting that done. Appreciate it.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So carried. Remember the micro machine, man?
A little harder.
It's a mascot, but you still did very well. Okay, 9D, fire marshal fees ordinance draft. This came out of a conversation I think we had after the meeting last time. Charlie, you and I had worked on this a year ago. And this is the draft. So I wanted to, we had intentionally parked this until after the adoption of the fire department ordinance. And after our conversation last week, I wanted to bring this back so people could take a look at it. I don't know if we want to act on it this evening, or if we certainly can. I think the attached fee schedule from Warehouse Point was a reference.
Did we run this by Broadbrook? Because I know they were, when I was at the meeting and I brought this up, that they are looking at this. I know that they are looking at this. And they're looking, did they contact you? They were supposed to.
I don't believe so. I see those guys like 3 times a week, and usually it's dropping off bills.
So I just want to make sure they were, I mean, if there's something that we were going to approve that they.
I'm happy to refer this to them. Their next meeting is
September 16th.
Yeah, no, it's 12th. Is it before ours or after ours? 13th or 20th?
13th. It's that's 6, so it's got to be 13.
Okay.
Is 13,000?
Yeah. So I can refer this to them for their consideration before we make any determinations. But I just, based on our conversation, I did dig it out and wanted to put it back in front of you guys.
Yeah, I would say they should have an opportunity to do it first.
Okay.
Just because some of their needs are going to be different than Warehouse Point needs.
Okay. The next item, 9E, discussion approve a cash disbursement procedure. This is the policy that's currently in place. Actually, I should back that up. This is the procedure that is currently in place. It's not a policy. The reason this came to light, there was an instance sometime in the last 3 weeks where there was a need for a check to be cut last minute, and we couldn't get a hold of 2 other selectmen to sign it, for various reasons. During the pandemic, because of the pandemic, we kind of suspended this practice, and I was the sole signatory on cutting checks. I don't want to do that, but I also don't want to have 2 of you come back in from wherever you are just so we can get I think in that case it was a band paid. So I was thinking about different ways that the process might be more streamlined, but still have a reasonable check in place. So rather than having 2 counter signatures to mine, I was thinking we could do 1, or rather than having you folks have to countersign the check runs, we could have the finance director do it. So I'm just trying to think of solutions to a problem that presented itself when there hadn't been one previously. So what are your thoughts on the current process, and if we need to change it, and if so, how we can change it? Ruth, if you want to take off, I don't think there's a need for you to hang. You're welcome to stay though.
Thank you on both counts.
All right.
I'll take off.
Does the signature have to be, fill out the cards from the bank that the check is written off? Oh,
No, it's the check runs.
oh, okay.
So in order for them to run the check, so when a check is printed in the town, my signature is on it and Amy's signature is on it. I don't sign every check. I sign these, and then they have an electronic version of my signature that goes automatically printed on after I release these and return and sign. This is a check for the auditor's purposes, but it wasn't an issue during the pandemic. I was the only signature; nobody else countersigned. Again, I don't want to do that, but I want to think about if the process that we have historically used still makes the most sense, or if there's a better way to go about doing it. So choices that I can think of are: we keep things status quo, we reduce the number of selectmen signatures from 2 to 1, or we have the treasurer countersign. Her signature is also on the checks that are printed, by the way.
I would be in favor of either keeping it the way it is now or requiring 1 selectman signature. I think that I wouldn't want us to be taken out of the process completely. I think one of us should at least have eyes on it.
Other thoughts?
There's nothing in the charter on this, is there? I mean, I like having some awareness, but I also often, when I'm looking at it, and so the same thing when I was selecting last time, I think it's hard for us to, like, besides asking questions, which there might be something that pops up, you know, like, hey, there's a selectman getting a check, why, you know, that kind of stuff. But other than that, we really don't have the context, you know, but I do like to have the awareness.
I agree.
We could continue to provide check runs for review. You know, if you wanted them for informational purposes, we could certainly, no, that's easy enough to just have copies. We could even, I was going to say include them in the packet, but I'm not sure I want to do that. They could be provided by a Manila green folder.
And that's reviewing them after the fact.
But it's to Alan's point, that would be for informational purposes. I'm thinking about workflow and you know, making sure checks are going out the door.
Yeah, and I don't want to add new things to do or that kind of stuff either, you know, but I do like the selectmen having awareness. You know, a lot of times, okay, there's all these checks, but we don't have a context to put in it, so we don't.
Sure, right, wrong. You can pick any one of these, and you know, explain to me what the Golden West Industrial SU is for $164.
Right. But there's, and not this time around, but last time around, there was a couple. I was like, whoa, hey, hold on here. You know?
I have called and asked on a couple of things that I didn't know why.
Okay, so are we going to stick with current practice and two of you just have to come in if there's a need, or do you want to reduce it to one?
I don't see any reason why you can't reduce it to one.
Yeah, I'm fine with one too.
I'd be fine with that.
Okay, so.
Which means then the green folder still comes and anybody that wants to look at it can look at it.
Speaking of, who wants to sign these?
She likes doing this.
I do, because I do. Sometimes there are questions and it sparks.
In bid awards, section D, it says Board of Selectmen review and action. I don't remember really, maybe I'm just drawing blank, but I don't remember that we've ever been involved in rejecting or approving a bid award. I have to agree.
Well, you should say that because you know what the next thing we're doing is? Yes.
Well, I guess there's a first time for everything.
So again, this is a procedure. It's not a policy. That actually might be covered in policy. Coded in policy.
There's something in charter about that. And it's always been something that I've felt like there should be more of. We needed more input, or not input, but more visibility into. It's more important sometimes and less important than others, but.
You have to either define when it's more important or not, or you need to be prepared for it to always be more important.
Well, it should be always important because sometimes in certain administrations, it's definitely more important. For, you want me to put a finer point on it.
So I see what you're doing. If you want, we can do actually, I will task you with potentially redrafting the policy for consideration.
Well, I mean, I think we just have to follow it now, or the policy. Oh, okay. So
yeah, the policy.
Okay, yeah, give me the policy.
Okay. I'm going to send that to Alan. See, this is what happens. You guys start like asking questions, you get volunteers.
Gotta write that down.
Yeah, where's the other thing?
Don't ask questions. It's,
you know what? I don't even remember what it is now.
It's the historical delay time. You want
that's
to
right.
Zero.
That's right. That's right.
It's currently 45, and both Marie and I had issues with making it 0, but we're okay with something less. And we were supposed to talk about it, but we haven't yet because I haven't called it. So that's where that's at.
Okay. All right. So I'll send that to Alan. I'll notify the treasurer's office that we'll just need 2 signatures going forward. That will help any backflow they have, I'm sure. So thank you for your consideration of that. The next thing is 9G, East Windsor Police Department Consultant Services Agreements. So this, as you remember, we talked about a year ago about the need to start thinking more seriously of replacing our emergency radio system that services everybody townwide. The school, WPCA, police, fire, EMS, town, DPW, social services, Parks and Rec, everybody's on the same radio system. It's about 80%, it's about 180% through its useful life, meaning that it was a 10-year system, it's now on year 18, so we need to get more serious about replacing it. The first step with that, and there was a committee that met with representatives from each of those organizations that talked about what it is that we were looking for. The conclusion was that what we would like to see is bring in a consultant to tell us what our needs are and what our options are. Rather than move to an option, we want to make sure that it meets the needs of the town in the most economic way that we can. So we did the RFP. They've done a site walkthrough. This is the low bidder. I'm reasonably sure this is the low bidder. There were two bids. One was a 3-phase bid that was more costly, and one was a 1-phase bid that was less costly but more expensive than phase 1 of the 3-phase bid. Basically, we're opting to go with the 1-phase bid because depending on what the conclusion is, phases 2 and 3 wouldn't be necessary. So doing an assessment of the infrastructure that we have and the available resources may yield to a result that says we don't need to go to look into other infrastructure improvements if we transfer onto another system. So this is the RFP that was selected and the contract associated with it. So you guys need to review it and approve it or reject it. The money we put aside, I think it was in the end of the year transfers. We put aside the money to pay for it, so it's covered. And then depending on the cost of the results, which could be easily 7 figures, we have either existing bond capacity or I'm hopeful that the federal government would allow radio system replacements to fall under infrastructure projects for the American Rescue Plan. So we have opportunities to pay for whatever this is ultimately going to cost us to, but we need to figure out what our preferred solution is.
Just real quick, Jason, because I marked our rate, the scope of the work. You're saying they may not have to do that? What you just said. And then they have the appendix, but there's nothing on what that scope of work is going to be.
I had the same concern.
There's they actually submitted bid documents. That's what that reference is. Okay. It's accepting the statement of work in the bid documents.
So one with Marie's, I think, concern is that I don't see, like, I don't know what I'm paying $68K for.
So you want to see the scope of, you want to see the actual bid document?
Well, I'm not, well, there should be it's a statement of work. I mean, that it's referring to here. So it's, you know, what am I actually going to do? But I guess I'm less worried about that, but we're concerned, but and maybe I'm not understanding this correctly. You know, so under fees and expenses, it could be 68K if they eat up all the mileage expense. It's at least 66K.
Yep. We parked 75, I think 75 for it.
So I mean, that's a lot of money, and then it's only in effect for 1 year. So like I was like, well, what am I getting at the end of the year? What do I get here? And then it also says the town shall reimburse CDCG for all reasonable costs, you know, for lodging, travel, meals, out of pocket. Is that above and beyond the 68,000?
Yes, that's also a boilerplate language. I think they're, I want to say they're Bristol based.
This is New Hampshire.
Which the other one was Bristol based then.
Yeah, they're Barrington.
So they're going to have to stay here in order to get this done.
So I did have a concern with like, that's kind of an open, you know, we're going from 68K to absolutely more than that, right? But unknown. I mean, I guess we said
to stay at the roadway, that's for
Nobody should stay there.
Then the other thing I had an issue with, Article 7, submission of reports, it says during the term of this agreement, it'll provide for reports as the town may reasonably require. I would like to actually have that just be, you're going to give us written reports quarterly. Well, because I'm not really, I guess I'm concerned, like, it's a lot of money, and I'm not sure, and this is why I have a concern. At one point in time, some years back, and I think we got money from, we may or may not have gotten money for it, but we hired a economic development consultant, paid them $65,000, and literally got nothing for it. Like, literally, somebody point to me what we got, because we got nothing. So
When did that happen?
back in 2011, 2013.
It was that was Roger O'Brien.
Yes.
What paper were you on? Is that?
We had some meetings, we yapped and yada, yada, yada.
No, what page are you trying to update?
Okay, so on
Article 7 on page 3, he wants oral or written reports quarterly. And then,
and I guess I was concerned with, it talks about the statement of work, but I don't really know what that is, but I guess, somebody knows what it is. I mean, somebody thinks it's acceptable. I mean, I can't tell what it is. And my biggest concern is, okay, I mean, we've laid out specifically, you're going to pay 68K, but then you're going to pay more. And we don't even know, we have no clue what that might be, but you're going to pay more. And it could easily run over the 75K that we authorized.
Okay. So how about,
and then the other thing is I want quarterly reports.
Yeah, I got that already. So this was just by the footer. Josh generated this. So this isn't the company's contract. This is ours.
Gotcha.
So that means I'm more comfortable making amendments to it because it looks to me like it's our document. What if I asked the chief or Bill Freeman, who's running point on the project, and just did exactly this thing when he was a lieutenant in Windsor 2 years ago? What if I asked them to come to the meeting on the 16th and give us a rundown of the statement of work, and I can include that in the selectmen's packet ahead of time, so you guys can read it.
Yeah, that's actually, I was thinking that maybe that guy was going to be here, and I saw his name somewhere here.
Well, we had a pretty full day.
No, I'm not casting shade on anybody, but I was hoping that we were going to be able to talk to somebody from the police department, because I imagine they're probably the most knowledgeable of what this is all about.
Punch is up there too.
Yeah, that's true. He actually, I think, was last time he did something, he was one of the leaders of getting that done. Multi-band or something like that. He does a tenant case. It's funny. The same things just until you hold it over again.
No. I don't even know what to say to that.
So it's good we learned something the second time around.
You know what I learned today? Oh,
okay. So can I have a motion to postpone agenda item 9G until September 16th?
I'll move to postpone agenda item 9G till the 9/16 meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So we are now on the tax refunds.
Move to approve the tax refunds totaling $3,762.95.
Oh, I know some of these people. My name's still not on there. Made and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So it is 10 after 10. I propose this. What if I hand peg my selectmen's report and anybody else who's got it electronically or written does the same, and anybody who doesn't, feel free to give their report. So I'm going to hand mine in and recognize Marie.
I have one.
Okay. Al.
I just want to say briefly that probably the most impactful thing that I was involved in the last couple of weeks was passing the new wetlands ordinance, which is something we've been working on collectively for about a decade. And over the last 2 years, it's been a lot of work done by the Wetlands Commission and staff. So I really appreciate it. And I'm really, really happy to see that finally in place. And I'm also very happy to say that we did pass the new open space ordinance, which I think is in the best interest of the taxpayers of this town, and that are interested in preserving open space, farmland, and whatnot. So really, really happy to see both of those now in the books and available for use.
Sarah.
I'll be happy to submit mine electronically.
Fair enough. Charlie.
I'll submit mine electronically, but just in brief, the Trolling Museum has a full booked weekend this weekend with lots of great events. And that's all I really had on my report.
Anything that moves on Saturday?
Saturday is everything's moving, yeah, with trains and planes and automobiles. So and a photo shoot and a craft fair. So they got a full weekend. What time does that start?
11.
Which
11. I think I might have it in my calendar.
So you're definitely going to that. Okay, any public participation? Is there anybody online who would like to address the board? Hey, how about you? We will have an executive session to include just the 5 of us. There will be no action afterwards. So if I could have a motion to go into executive session.
We go into executive session. Thank you.
Is there a second?
Second.
Made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We are in executive session at 10:11 p.m. And there will be no further action for the selectmen this evening. Other than adjournment. It's 10:46. We're out of executive session. Is there any further business to come before the Board of Selectmen? Seeing none, a motion to adjourn would be in order.
Move we adjourn at 10:46 p.m.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned at 10:46 p.m.